For my 38th birthday, my wife's mother gifted me divorce papers. From all of US, she announced at the restaurant. My wife recorded my reaction for their entertainment. I thanked her, signed them immediately, and walked out. She had no idea what I'd already done. You know what they say about turning 38? It's supposed to be just another year closer to 40, right? Well, let me tell you something about birthdays. They're supposed to involve cake, maybe some awkward singing, and your family pretending to care about you for exactly one day. What they're not supposed to involve is getting served divorce papers like you're some deadbeat who forgot to pay child support. But here I was, sitting in Riversong Bistro, this overpriced joint that serves $12 appetizers and calls them artisanal, staring at my mother-in-law Margaret Collins as she stood up like she was about to give the damn State of the Union address. The woman had this smug little smile plastered across her face, the kind that screamed, "I'm about to ruin your entire existence, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it." "From all of us," she announced, holding out this pink butterfly envelope like it was the Hope Diamond. Jesus Christ, pink butterflies. Even their choice of stationery was insulting. I mean, what kind of psychopath puts divorce papers in an envelope that looks like it should contain a 6-year-old's birthday party invitation? The whole table went dead quiet. You know that feeling when you walk into a surprise party, except instead of people yelling surprise, they're all waiting for you to have a mental breakdown? Yeah, that was the vibe. My wife Julia, soon-to-be ex-wife, apparently, had her phone out faster than a tourist at Times Square, angling it toward me like she was filming the next viral TikTok. Her brother Marcus was leaning forward with this shit-eating grin that made me want to throw my water glass at his perfectly groomed face. I tore open the envelope, and there it was in black and white. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Fancy legal jargon for "we're done here, buddy." The papers looked official as hell, all stamped and notarized and ready to go. These people had done their homework. I'll give them that. They'd probably been planning this little performance for weeks, maybe months. The thing is, when you're expecting something like this, and trust me, I was, it doesn't hit you the way they want it to. They were all sitting there like vultures waiting for me to cry, beg, maybe flip the table over, and cause a scene that would give them something to gossip about for the next 5 years. Margaret probably had her whole Bridge Club speech ready. You should have seen how he completely lost it at Riversong. Poor Julia, she's so much better off without him. But you know what I did instead? I pulled out my pen, the same Mont Blanc Julia had given me last Christmas, ironically enough, and signed those papers right there at the table. Didn't even read the fine print. Just scribbled my name on every line that said respondent, and slid the whole stack back toward Margaret like I was returning a bad meal. "Thank you," I said, standing up and adjusting my jacket. This is exactly what I needed. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. You could have heard a pin drop in that overpriced restaurant. Julia's phone was still recording, but now she looked like she'd just watched someone kick a puppy. Marcus's grin had completely disappeared, replaced by this confused expression like he'd just solved a math problem and gotten the wrong answer. And Margaret? Oh, Margaret looked like someone had just told her that her precious country club membership had been revoked. That's it. Julia stammered, finally lowering her phone. "You're not going to fight this?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for what I knew would probably be the last time as her husband. 5 years of marriage, and she still thought she knew me. Still thought I was the same guy who'd bend over backward to make her family happy, who'd sit there and take their passive-aggressive comments with a smile. "Fight what, Julia? Your happiness." I shrugged. "If this is what you want, then congratulations. You got it." Marcus cleared his throat, clearly trying to salvage whatever this was supposed to be. "Look, man, this doesn't have to be." "Doesn't have to be what, Marcus?" "Easy. Too late for that." I pulled out my wallet and dropped a 50 on the table. This should cover my share of the bill. And the entertainment. I could feel every eye in that restaurant on me as I walked toward the exit. The other diners had probably figured out they were witnessing some kind of family drama. And let's be honest, people eat that stuff up like it's free cable. I could hear the whispers starting already. "Did you see that?" Just signed the papers and walked out. Cold as ice. But here's the thing they didn't know. The thing that Margaret and Julia and precious Marcus had no clue about. While they'd been sitting around planning this little birthday ambush, thinking they were so clever with their legal papers and their dramatic timing, I'd been 10 steps ahead of them. See, they thought they knew me. thought I was just Julia's husband who runs a small business. That's how Margaret always introduced me at parties, with air quotes and everything. They thought I was some kind of underachiever who should be grateful to be part of their precious family. They thought I'd fall apart without them, that I'd come crawling back begging for another chance. What they didn't know was that their little envelope had just handed me the one thing I'd been waiting for: freedom. Complete, total, no strings attached freedom from their toxic little dynasty. As I pushed through the restaurant doors and stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more family dinners where I was the punchline. No more Margaret's condescending comments about my cute little company. No more pretending to laugh at Marcus's jokes about how real men work in corporate America. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been saving for exactly this moment. "Claire," I said when my sister picked up. "It's done. They actually went through with it. Jesus, they really served you divorce papers at your birthday dinner. Pink butterfly envelope and everything. I'm telling you, these people have no sense of irony." Claire laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard in months. "So what now?" I looked back through the restaurant window. I could see Margaret gesticulating wildly, probably trying to explain to the table why their brilliant plan had just backfired spectacularly. Julia was staring at the signed papers like they might suddenly burst into flames. Marcus looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "Now," I smiled, turning away from the window and walking toward my car. "Now the real fun begins. Because here's what Margaret Collins and her perfect little family were about to find out. When you try to destroy someone's life, you better make damn sure you actually can." And they had absolutely no idea what they'd just unleashed. 3 days before my birthday disaster at Riversong Bistro, I was having one of those days where everything goes wrong from the minute you wake up. You know the kind. Coffee maker breaks, traffic's a nightmare, and your biggest client decides they want to revisit the terms of a contract you've been working on for months. So when I pulled into my driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon instead of my usual 6 o'clock, all I wanted was to grab a beer, maybe catch the last half of whatever game was on, and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. But apparently, the universe had other plans. I walked through the front door expecting the usual afternoon silence. Julia would be at her yoga class, or getting her nails done, or doing whatever it is that women who don't work do with their afternoons. Instead, I heard this weird shuffling sound coming from the dining room, like someone was frantically organizing papers. Now, let me paint you a picture of our dining room. It's this formal space that Julia insisted we needed because proper families have proper dining rooms. We've probably eaten in there maybe 6 times in 5 years of marriage, and most of those were when Margaret came over to judge our furniture choices. The rest of the time, it's basically a very expensive storage room for Julia's craft projects and whatever random crap accumulates when you have too much house and not enough purpose. So hearing activity in there was already weird. But what I saw when I peeked around the corner, that was straight up suspicious as hell. There was Margaret Collins, hunched over our dining table like some kind of evil secretary, wearing those reading glasses that made her look like a librarian who'd snap your head off for returning a book late. She had papers spread out everywhere, official-looking documents with letterheads and seals, and all that legal mumbo-jumbo that makes your stomach drop even when you're not doing anything wrong. But here's the kicker. She had a red pen in her hand, and she was marking up these papers like a teacher grading the worst essay she'd ever read, making notes in the margins, circling things, drawing arrows, the whole 9 yards. This wasn't just reading. This was editing. This was strategizing. And sitting right next to her elbow was one of those festive birthday envelopes, pink with little butterflies all over it, just waiting to be filled. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, watching her work, before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. This wasn't some random paperwork. This wasn't Margaret helping Julia organize our insurance policies or updating our will. This was something else entirely, something that required secrecy and planning and apparently a lot of red ink. That's when I decided to make my presence known. "Hey, Margaret," I said, stepping into the room like I hadn't been standing there watching her little document editing session. "Didn't expect to see you here." Holy shit, you should have seen her reaction. The woman practically launched herself into orbit. Papers went flying, the red pen shot across the table like a tiny missile, and those reading glasses nearly flew off her face. For a split second, she looked exactly like what she was, someone who'd been caught red-handed doing something she definitely shouldn't have been doing. But Margaret Collins didn't get to be the queen bee of the Willowbrook Country Club by folding under pressure. Within about 3 seconds, she'd gathered up all those papers like she was shuffling a deck of cards, slid them into that butterfly envelope faster than a Vegas dealer, and put on that fake smile that could win Academy Awards. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, standing up and smoothing down her blouse like nothing had happened. "I didn't hear you come in." "Early day," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual while my brain was doing backflips trying to process what I'd just witnessed. "What's all that?" "Just family paperwork," she said, clutching that envelope to her chest like it contained state secrets. "You know how it is. Always something that needs organizing. Family paperwork. Right. Because family paperwork definitely requires the kind of intensive red pen editing I just watched her doing. Because family paperwork definitely needs to be hidden in birthday card envelopes when the actual family member walks into the room." I nodded like I believed her, because what else was I going to do? Accuse my mother-in-law of plotting against me based on 30 seconds of suspicious behavior? That's the kind of thing that gets you labeled as paranoid and crazy, the kind of thing that gives people ammunition to use against you later. "Where's Julia?" I asked instead. "Oh, she'll be down in a minute," Margaret said, still holding that envelope like it might explode. "She's just finishing up a phone call." As if on cue, I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Julia appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. She took one look at the scene, me standing there, Margaret clutching her mysterious envelope, papers and pens scattered across the table. And I swear I could see some kind of silent communication pass between them. "Mom, I thought you were going to wait until..." Julia started, then caught herself. Hi, honey. You're home early." "Yeah, rough day at the office," I said, watching both of them carefully. "Your mom was just telling me about some family paperwork she's working on." Julia's eyes flicked to the envelope in Margaret's hands, then back to me. "Oh, that. Yeah, it's nothing important. Just some stuff for Dad's estate." Now, Julia's dad had been dead for 3 years. 3 years. And in all that time, I'd never once seen Margaret working on estate paperwork that required the kind of intense focus I'd just witnessed. But sure, let's go with that story. "Well, I'll let you two finish up," I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge and heading toward the living room. "Let me know if you need anything." But as I walked away, I could hear them whispering behind me. Urgent, hushed tones that people use when they're discussing things they don't want overheard. I caught fragments. "Thought he'd be at work until 6. And, need to be more careful." And something that sounded suspiciously like, "birthday." I settled into my recliner, cracked open my beer, and pretended to watch ESPN while my mind raced through possibilities. What kind of family paperwork requires that level of secrecy? What kind of documents need to be edited with a red pen and hidden in birthday card envelopes? And why did Julia look like she'd been caught stealing candy when she saw me standing there? The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became. This wasn't about her dad's estate. This wasn't about organizing insurance policies or updating emergency contacts. This was about me. Had to be. Because what else would require that kind of cloak-and-dagger behavior in my own damn house? Over the next hour, I watched Margaret leave, hugging that envelope like it contained the crown jewels. I watched Julia pace around the house, checking her phone every few minutes like she was waiting for some kind of confirmation. I watched both of them avoid making eye contact with me, speaking in those overly cheerful tones that people use when they're trying to act normal and failing miserably. And you know what? I let them think they'd gotten away with it. I let them believe I was clueless, that I hadn't seen anything suspicious, that I was just the oblivious husband who came home early and interrupted their little planning session. But inside, I was already 3 moves ahead. Because if Margaret Collins and my dear wife Julia thought they were going to blindside me with whatever they'd been cooking up, they had another thing coming. Game on, ladies. Game fucking on. Let me tell you something about the Collins family. They perfected the art of making someone feel like absolute garbage while smiling the entire time. It's like a superpower, except instead of fighting crime, they use it to slowly crush your soul at dinner parties. Margaret Collins had despised me from day one. I'm talking about the very first time Julia brought me home to meet the family. Back when we were still in that honeymoon phase where you think love conquers all and family drama is just something that happens to other people. What a naive little shit I was. I remember walking into their house, This massive colonial in the fancy part of town with the circular driveway and the perfectly manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than most people's salaries. Margaret opened the door wearing this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, looked me up and down like she was evaluating livestock, and said, "So you're the young man Julia's been telling us about." Even then, I could hear the disappointment in her voice. Like Julia had been hyping up some kind of Prince Charming, and instead she got stuck with, well, me. But the real fun started when we got to parties. Oh man, the parties. The Collins family loved their social gatherings, charity fundraisers, country club events, neighborhood barbecues where everyone compared their kids' accomplishments and tried to one-up each other with stories about their latest vacations to Europe. At every single one of these events, Margaret would introduce me the exact same way. "This is Julia's husband. He runs a small business." And she'd say small business, like it was some kind of communicable disease, with this tone that suggested I was probably selling bootleg DVDs out of the trunk of my car. It didn't matter that I was actually building something, that Ridgewell Solutions was growing every year, that I was working my ass off to create something meaningful. To Margaret, if it wasn't a Fortune 500 company with a corner office and a secretary, it wasn't worth mentioning. And God forbid I tried to explain what my company actually did. Logistics and supply chain management aren't exactly cocktail party conversation, apparently. How? Entrepreneurial, she'd say, like being an entrepreneur was just a fancy way of saying unemployed. Then she'd quickly change the subject to something more impressive, like how Marcus had just gotten another promotion at his big corporate job, or how their neighbor's son was doing so well at his law firm. And Julia, my loving, supportive wife? She'd just stand there nodding along, sometimes even laughing at her mother's passive-aggressive comments. Not once, not fucking once, did she ever jump in to defend me or correct her mother's dismissive attitude. Not when Margaret joked about how I probably couldn't afford to take Julia on proper vacations. Not when she made comments about how some people weren't cut out for the corporate world. Not even when she straight up asked Julia, right in front of me, if she ever missed dating successful men. The worst part was watching Julia's face during these interactions. At first, she'd look uncomfortable, maybe give me an apologetic smile like she was sorry her mother was being such a bitch. But over time, that discomfort turned into something else. She started looking at me the way Margaret did, like I was some kind of disappointing consolation prize she'd settled for. Marcus was even worse, if that's possible. Julia's younger brother had landed this cushy job at some tech company right out of college, and he never let anyone forget it. Every family gathering was like a one-man show where Marcus got to perform his "look how successful I am" routine for an audience that ate it up like he was the second coming of Steve Jobs. "So, still doing the logistics thing?" He'd ask me, with this smirk that made me want to punch his perfectly straight teeth. "That's cool, man. I mean, someone's got to handle the behind-the-scenes stuff, right?" Behind-the-scenes stuff. Like I was some kind of janitor cleaning up after the real professionals. And then he'd launch into stories about his latest project, using all the corporate buzzwords he'd learned in business school. "We're really disrupting the paradigm," he'd say, or "it's all about leveraging synergies to maximize our value proposition." The whole family would nod along like he was speaking ancient wisdom instead of spouting the same MBA bullshit that every corporate drone learns in their first week. The comparisons were endless and brutal. At Christmas dinner, Margaret would announce how Marcus had gotten another raise, then turn to me and ask how business was going, with air quotes and everything. At Julia's birthday party, she'd make a big show of praising Marcus for taking his girlfriend on some expensive trip to Napa Valley, then comment about how some couples prefer to stay closer to home, looking directly at Julia and me like we were too poor or too unambitious to do anything interesting. But you know what really killed me? The way Julia started buying into it. Slowly, gradually, she stopped defending my work and started making her own little comments. "Maybe you should think about getting a real job," she'd say after particularly brutal family dinners. "I mean, Marcus makes twice what you do, and he gets benefits." Benefits, like health insurance and a 401k were the measure of a man's worth. She started rolling her eyes when I'd get excited about a new contract or a business opportunity. Started sighing when I'd work late or take weekend calls. Started looking at me like I was holding her back from the life she deserved, the life Marcus had, the life her mother constantly reminded her that other people's husbands provided. Every family dinner became a performance where I was the opening act for the Marcus show. He'd talk about his company's IPO plans, his stock options, his corner office with the view of downtown. The whole family would hang on every word like he was reporting live from the moon. And me? I got to sit there and smile while they praised him for doing exactly what millions of other corporate drones do every day. Showing up, following orders, and collecting a paycheck. Meanwhile, I was out there building something from scratch, creating jobs, solving problems, taking real risks. But because it didn't come with a fancy title and a corporate expense account, it didn't count. The crazy part was, I actually liked Marcus at first, before I realized what a pretentious asshole he'd become, back when he was just Julia's annoying little brother instead of the golden child who could do no wrong. But success had gone to his head, and Margaret's constant praise had turned him into this smug, condescending prick who thought his corporate job made him better than everyone else. You know, he said to me once at a barbecue, if you ever want to get serious about your career, I could probably get you an interview at my company. I mean, they're always looking for people to handle the operational stuff. Operational stuff. Like I was applying to be his assistant. But the absolute worst part, the thing that really drove the knife home, was watching Julia transform from the woman who'd fallen in love with my ambition and drive into someone who saw those same qualities as embarrassing flaws. She stopped asking about my work, stopped celebrating when I landed big contracts, stopped believing that what I was building mattered. Instead, she started looking at other couples at parties, comparing what their husbands did for a living, wondering out loud why she couldn't have the same lifestyle as her friends. The woman who'd once told me she loved my independence and entrepreneurial spirit was now asking why I couldn't just get a normal job like everyone else. And through it all, Margaret kept chipping away, one dinner party at a time, one passive-aggressive comment at a time, until she'd successfully convinced her daughter that she'd married beneath her station. Mission accomplished, I guess. You know how they say the straw that breaks the camel's back? Well, my straw wasn't even a straw. It was more like a fucking telephone pole dropped from orbit. And it happened on a Tuesday night in March, when I was supposed to be the invisible husband minding his own business, while the real adults handled the important stuff. I'd been working late in my home office, grinding through some contract proposals for a potential government deal that could triple my company's revenue. Not that anyone in this house gave a damn about that. To them, I was just the guy who disappeared into the spare bedroom every night to play with his little business, like I was building model airplanes instead of running a legitimate company. Around 10:30, I decided to grab a beer from the kitchen and maybe catch the late-night highlights. As I walked past the living room, I could hear Julia on the phone, and something about her tone made me stop. She was using that low, conspiratorial voice that people use when they're discussing secrets. The kind of voice that immediately makes you want to know what the hell they're talking about. I know, Mom, she was saying, and I could practically hear Margaret's voice through the phone, poisoning the conversation from 20 miles away. He's holding me back. I can see that now. I stood there in the hallway, beer forgotten, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut. Holding her back? From what exactly? From sitting around the house all day, spending money she didn't earn? From going to lunch with her vapid friends and complaining about how boring her life was? Marcus's friend owns the company, Julia continued, and now I was fully eavesdropping, pressed against the wall like some kind of spy movie cliché. He says there's a position opening up in their marketing department that would be perfect for someone with my background. Her background. Right. Julia had a communications degree from a state school and exactly 0 years of work experience since we'd gotten married. But apparently, that qualified her for some marketing position at whatever company Marcus's buddy ran. Nepotism at its finest. It pays really well, too, she said, and I could hear the excitement creeping into her voice. Like, really well. More than enough to support myself, you know? Support herself. Jesus Christ. She was already planning her exit strategy, calculating how much money she'd need to ditch her disappointing husband and start fresh. And she was doing it with help from Marcus and his corporate connections, naturally. I just need to wait for the right time, Julia went on. Maybe after his birthday? I don't want to ruin his special day or anything. How fucking considerate of her. Don't ruin my birthday by leaving me. Wait until after the cake and presents to drop the bomb. That's real class right there. No, Mom, I'm not going to just walk away with nothing, she said, and now her voice took on this calculating edge that I'd never heard before. I've been married to him for 5 years. I deserve something for putting up with, well, you know, his lack of ambition, his stubbornness about staying in that dead-end business. Dead-end business. The company I'd built from scratch, the thing I poured my heart and soul into every single day, reduced to a dead-end business by my loving wife and her poisonous mother. Marcus says his lawyer friend could help with that, Julia continued. Make sure I get what I'm entitled to. Half the house, alimony, maybe even part of his business if we can prove I contributed to its success somehow. Part of my business. They wanted to take a piece of the company I'd built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. The company they'd spent years dismissing and belittling was suddenly valuable enough to steal when it served their purposes. It's just a matter of time before everything's official, she said, and I could hear her moving around the living room, probably pacing the way she did when she got excited about something. I mean, I've already been talking to David, Marcus's friend, about the position. He's very interested in what I could bring to the company. David. She was already on a first-name basis with her future boss, the guy who was going to rescue her from her terrible life with her underachieving husband. I wondered if Marcus had set up that introduction personally, or if Margaret had orchestrated the whole thing from behind the scenes. I know. Julia laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. I should have listened to you years ago. You tried to warn me about marrying someone so unestablished. But you know how I was back then. I thought love was enough. Love was enough. Past tense. Because apparently, whatever I'd thought we'd had, wasn't love anymore. It was just an inconvenient obstacle standing between Julia and the life she deserved. Well, better late than never, right? She said. And it's not like he'll be surprised. I mean, he has to know this isn't working. We barely talk anymore. We don't have anything in common, and God knows the physical side of things is. She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Apparently, our sex life was now part of the evidence for why she needed to escape this horrible marriage. Nothing like having your wife discuss your bedroom performance with your mother-in-law to really drive the humiliation home. Marcus thinks I should just rip the Band-Aid off, Julia said. But I want to do this right, you know? Clean and simple. No drama, no fighting. Just a quick divorce, and everyone moves on with their lives. Clean and simple. A quick divorce. Like 5 years of marriage could be dismissed as easily as returning a sweater that didn't fit right. I just need to be smart about it, she continued. Make sure I have everything lined up first. The job, the lawyer, maybe even an apartment. I don't want to depend on him for anything during the transition. The transition. She'd already planned out her entire post-marriage life, complete with a new job courtesy of Marcus's connections and legal advice from yet another friend of the family. Meanwhile, I was supposed to be the clueless husband who never saw it coming. You're right, Mom, Julia said, and now she sounded almost giddy with anticipation. This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I can finally start living the life I was meant to have. The life she was meant to have. Not the life we were building together, not the partnership I'd thought we had, but some fantasy existence where she was married to a guy like Marcus instead of stuck with a loser like me. I stood there in that hallway for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few more minutes, listening to my wife plan my destruction with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for vacation planning. She was going to leave me, take half of everything I'd worked for, and do it all with a smile while her family cheered her on from the sidelines. When she finally hung up, I crept back to my office and closed the door, my hands shaking as I sat down at my desk. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone in my own house. The woman sleeping in my bed, eating food I paid for, living in a house I'd bought, was actively plotting against me with the full support of her toxic family. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my office chair, staring at my computer screen, replaying every word of that conversation over and over again. Julia thought she was being so clever, so strategic. She had no idea that her clueless husband had just heard every detail of her brilliant plan. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes it comes back to bite you in the ass. While Julia was busy planning her escape with help from Marcus and Margaret, I was already 10 steps ahead of her, building something they couldn't even imagine. They wanted to play games? Fine. Game on. Here's the thing about being underestimated. It's actually a hell of a superpower when you know how to use it. While Margaret Collins was busy telling everyone at her bridge club about her daughter's poor choice in husbands, and Julia was rolling her eyes every time I mentioned a new contract, I was quietly building an empire right under their noses. See, they were so obsessed with appearances, so focused on corporate titles and corner offices, that they completely missed what was actually happening in their own house. To them, I was just the guy who disappeared into the spare bedroom every night to work on his cute little logistics company. They had no idea that their small business owner was about to become richer than Marcus would ever dream of being. It started about 4 years ago, right around the time Margaret's passive-aggressive comments were reaching peak toxicity. I'd been running Ridgewell Solutions for 6 years at that point, and we were doing okay. Not spectacular, but solid enough to pay the bills and keep Julia in the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. But, okay, wasn't going to cut it anymore. Not when I had to listen to Marcus brag about his 6-figure salary every damn weekend. So I decided to get serious. Really serious. The first move was acquiring Peterson Freight, a smaller company that was struggling with cash flow but had some killer government connections. The owner, Bill Peterson, was about ready to retire anyway, and I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Not because I threw ridiculous money at him. I wasn't exactly swimming in cash back then, but because I offered him something better. A partnership deal where he'd stay on as a consultant and still get a cut of the profits. Julia barely noticed when I told her about the acquisition. "That's nice, honey," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "Does this mean you'll be working even later now?" If she'd bothered to ask questions, real questions about what Peterson Freight brought to the table, she might have realized that Bill Peterson had connections with the Department of Defense. Government contracts that could turn a mid-sized logistics company into something much, much bigger. But Julia didn't ask questions. Neither did Margaret. Neither did Marcus, who was too busy humble bragging about his latest promotion to pay attention to what his loser brother-in-law was actually doing. The second acquisition came 18 months later, Crawford Supply Chain, a company that specialized in cold storage and pharmaceutical logistics. This one was trickier because Crawford was actually profitable, but they'd gotten themselves into some legal trouble with a contamination scare that wasn't even their fault. The media had crucified them, their stock price tanked, and suddenly they were willing to sell for about 60 cents on the dollar. I borrowed against everything I had, the house, my personal savings, even my fucking car, to make that deal happen. It was the kind of risk that keeps you awake at night, the kind of bet that could either make you rich or destroy your life completely. Julia noticed the paperwork that time, mainly because I had documents spread all over the dining room table for about 2 weeks while my lawyers and accountants worked out the details. "What's all this?" she asked one morning, stepping around stacks of contracts like they were piles of dirty laundry. "Just expanding the business," I told her. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Good," she said, grabbing her coffee and heading out to meet her friends for lunch. "As long as it doesn't affect our finances." Our finances, right. Because the money I was risking, money I'd earned, was somehow our money, but the business decisions were mine alone to worry about. If she'd stuck around for 5 more minutes, she might have learned that Crawford Supply Chain had a contract with 3 major pharmaceutical companies and a partnership with FedEx that was worth about $12 million annually. But Julia had more important things to do, like getting her nails done and complaining to her friends about how boring her husband's work was. The real game changer came 2 years ago, a Department of Defense contract for logistics support in Southeast Asia. It was the kind of deal that most small companies never even hear about, let alone compete for. But thanks to Bill Peterson's connections and Crawford's pharmaceutical expertise, Ridgewell Solutions was suddenly in the running for a contract worth $75 million over 3 years. The bidding process took 8 months. 8 months of presentations, security clearances, site visits, and enough paperwork to deforest half of Oregon. I was working 16-hour days, flying to Washington twice a week, and basically living on coffee and determination. And what did my loving family think I was doing during this time? "He's been so stressed lately." I overheard Julia telling Margaret one afternoon. "I think his little business is having problems. Maybe he should consider getting a real job before things get too bad." A real job. While I was competing for the biggest government contract in my company's history, my wife was suggesting I should apply to work for someone else. The day I got the call that we'd won the contract, I was sitting in my office at home, surrounded by 3 months' worth of financial projections and contingency plans. When the Pentagon procurement officer told me the news, I literally had to ask him to repeat it because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. $75 million. Over 3 years. With options for renewal that could double that amount. I hung up the phone and just sat there for about 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of a single phone call, Ridgewell Solutions had gone from a mid-sized logistics company to a major government contractor. We were going to need to hire 60 new employees, lease additional warehouse space, and probably buy a fleet of trucks just to handle the first year of the contract. When Julia came home that evening, I was still sitting in my office, staring at the contract documents that had been emailed over for my signature. "How was your day?" she asked from the doorway, not really waiting for an answer before launching into a story about some drama at her yoga class. "Pretty good," I said. "We landed a big contract." "That's nice," she replied, already walking away. "What do you want for dinner?" "A $75 million contract," and she responded like I'd told her I'd organized my sock drawer. But that was just the beginning. Once word got out that Ridgewell Solutions was handling major Defense Department logistics, other opportunities started falling into my lap. Private sector contracts with companies that needed someone who could handle sensitive, high-security supply chain management. International deals with allies who were looking for American companies with government credentials. Within 6 months of winning that first Pentagon contract, my company's valuation had increased by roughly 3,000%. We went from being a decent-sized regional player to a nationally recognized logistics contractor practically overnight. And through all of this, through every late-night strategy session, every high-stakes presentation, every nerve-wracking negotiation, my wife and her family continued to treat me like some kind of underachieving disappointment who couldn't figure out how to get a real job. The best part? I set up a trust fund under my sister Claire's name, moving most of my assets out of reach of any potential divorce proceedings. Not because I was planning to leave Julia, but because I'd learned to think strategically about everything. Claire didn't ask questions when I explained the setup to her. She just smiled and said, "About time you started protecting yourself." So while Margaret was at her bridge club complaining about her daughter's unsuccessful husband, and Julia was daydreaming about the life she could have with someone like Marcus, I was quietly becoming wealthier than any of them could imagine. The really ironic part? If they'd just treated me with a basic level of respect, if they'd shown even mild interest in what I was building, they could have been part of something amazing. Instead, their obsession with status and appearances blinded them to the empire growing right under their noses. Their loss was about to become my freedom. You know that old saying about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I was about to open a 5-star restaurant specializing in Arctic cuisine because what I had planned for the Collins family was going to be colder than a penguin's ass in Antarctica. After overhearing Julia's little phone conversation with Margaret, the one where they casually discussed dismantling my life like they were planning a fucking garage sale, I realized I had 2 choices. I could either confront them like some kind of emotional amateur and give them time to adjust their strategy, or I could play chess while they were still figuring out how to use checkers pieces. Guess which option I chose? The next morning, while Julia was at her Pilates class pretending to exercise, I called my lawyer. Not the family lawyer, the guy we'd used for our house purchase and wills, but my business attorney, Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca was the kind of lawyer who could find loopholes in the 10 Commandments and make Moses thank her for the legal advice. "I need to discuss some asset protection strategies," I told her when she picked up. Hypothetically speaking, Rebecca had been handling my business legal work for 3 years, so she knew exactly what hypothetically speaking meant. It meant someone was about to get screwed, and it wasn't going to be her client. "How hypothetical are we talking?" she asked. "Let's say someone might try to claim half of everything I've built, including parts of my business, in the very near future." There was a pause, then that predatory chuckle that Rebecca reserved for cases where she got to destroy people legally. "How near are we talking?" "Could be any day now." "Well then, we better schedule a meeting. Today if possible." 3 hours later, I was sitting in Rebecca's downtown office, looking out at the city skyline while she laid out a strategy that was so beautifully ruthless it almost brought tears to my eyes. "First thing," she said, pulling out a legal pad and starting to scribble notes. "We move everything into protected accounts. Business assets go into the corporate trust, personal investments get transferred to offshore holdings, and your real estate gets restructured under the company's name. How long will that take? If we push hard? About a week. But here's the beautiful part. Everything we're doing is completely legal. We're not hiding assets. We're reorganizing them for legitimate business and tax purposes. Your wife's theoretical lawyer won't be able to touch any of it. I love this woman. Not romantically. Rebecca was happily married to a federal judge. But professionally, she was like watching a master artist paint with lawsuits and loopholes. What about the house? I asked. Easy. Ridgewell Solutions needs a corporate headquarters, right? The house becomes company property, leased back to you at market rate. Completely legitimate business expense, totally protected from any marital claims. While Rebecca worked on the legal side, I had my own preparations to make. That evening, I opened my laptop and started updating my will. The old version left everything to Julia, because that's what you do when you're married and stupidly believe your wife actually loves you. The new version was a masterpiece of strategic distribution. Everything, and I mean everything, went to my niece Lily, Claire's daughter. The kid was only 16, but she was smart as hell and had never once treated me like a disappointment. Plus, Claire would manage the inheritance until Lily turned 25, which meant my sister would have control over a fortune that would make the Collins family's heads explode. I left Julia exactly $1. Not because I'm petty. Okay, maybe I'm a little petty, but because leaving someone nothing in a will can be contested. Leaving them $1? That's a clear message that says, I remembered you existed, and I decided you were worth exactly this much. The best part was the letter I attached to the will, explaining my reasoning. I detailed every insult, every dismissive comment, every time Julia had chosen her family's opinion over her husband's feelings. It was like a greatest hits album of marital disrespect, all documented with dates and witnesses. But I didn't stop there. Oh no, I was just getting warmed up. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly moved money around like I was running some kind of financial shell game. The joint checking account that Julia used for her daily expenses? I left just enough in there to cover the monthly bills, moving everything else into business accounts that she didn't even know existed. Our savings account, the one she thought contained about $40,000? That money got invested in a new subsidiary of Ridgewell Solutions, a company I created specifically to hold personal assets. Technically, we were broke. Practically, I was richer than ever. The credit cards were even more fun. I paid them all off and then called the companies to update our financial information. Since I was now technically unemployed, all my income was coming through corporate distributions. Julia's applications for new credit were going to be a real adventure. Meanwhile, I kept playing the part of the clueless husband beautifully. I asked Julia about her day, listened to her complain about her friend's drama, and pretended to care when she mentioned that Marcus was thinking about buying a new car, all while I was systematically dismantling every financial advantage she thought she'd have in the divorce. The real stroke of genius came when I restructured my business ownership. Instead of being the sole owner of Ridgewell Solutions, I created a holding company based in Delaware, because Delaware corporate law is basically designed to protect rich people from their problems, and transferred all my shares to that entity. On paper, I owned a management consulting firm that paid me a modest salary. In reality, I controlled a logistics empire worth tens of millions of dollars. But good luck explaining that distinction to a divorce court, especially when all the paperwork showed a struggling small business owner who barely made enough to cover his expenses. Julia had no idea that while she was planning to take half of everything, I was making sure there wouldn't be anything left to take. She thought she was being so clever, lining up her new job through Marcus's connections, getting legal advice from her family's lawyer friends, plotting her escape route like some kind of suburban mastermind. But here's what she didn't understand. I'd been planning for this possibility from the moment I realized what kind of family I'd married into. Every business decision, every investment, every legal structure I'd built over the past 4 years had been designed with one goal in mind: protecting what I'd earned from people who didn't deserve it. The night before my birthday, I sat in my office reviewing all the paperwork Rebecca had prepared. Asset transfers, corporate restructuring documents, updated insurance policies, new account statements. It was like looking at the blueprints for the most beautiful revenge plot ever conceived. Julia was upstairs getting ready for bed, probably texting with Margaret about their big surprise for tomorrow night. They had no idea that their victim had spent 2 weeks preparing for war while they were still playing dress-up. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff, a bottle of Macallan 18 that Julia always said was too expensive for regular occasions, and raised a toast to my reflection in the dark window. "Happy birthday to me," I said out loud. "This is going to be fun." The 3 days leading up to my 38th birthday were like watching a really bad spy movie where all the secret agents might as well have been wearing neon signs that said, "We're plotting against you." The whole house had this weird energy, like everyone was walking around with loaded guns and trying to act casual about it. Julia was the worst actress in this little production. The woman who'd barely acknowledged my existence for the past 6 months was suddenly Miss Sunshine, practically skipping around the house like she'd won the fucking lottery. She kept humming, actually humming, while she did mundane things like loading the dishwasher or folding laundry, which was suspicious as hell because Julia hadn't been happy about household chores since approximately never. "You seem cheerful," I said on Monday morning, watching her practically dance around the kitchen while making coffee. "Oh, I'm just excited about your birthday," she said, giving me this bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom has something really special planned." Something really special. Right. I bet she did. The phone calls were constant and obvious. Every time I walked into a room, someone would quickly hang up or switch to talking about the weather or what they were having for lunch. Margaret called at least 6 times a day, and Julia would take these calls in different rooms of the house, speaking in those hushed, conspiratorial tones that made it clear they weren't discussing birthday cake flavors. Tuesday afternoon, I was in the garage pretending to organize my tools when I heard Julia on the deck, pacing back and forth while she talked to someone on her phone. No, it has to be perfect," she was saying. "We only get one chance to do this right, and I want to make sure he knows exactly how we all feel about the situation, how they all felt about the situation. Jesus, they weren't even trying to be subtle. Marcus, I need you to be there," she continued, and now I could hear the excitement building in her voice. "This is going to be a family moment, and I want everyone to see his reaction." His reaction. They were planning to record my humiliation, probably so they could watch it later for entertainment. I had to give them credit for thoroughness, even if they sucked at operational security. "Evelyn's coming too, right?" Julia asked. "Good. I want him to understand that this isn't just coming from me and Mom. This is a family decision. A family decision. Like they'd held a fucking vote and decided unanimously that I needed to be removed from the Collins family tree. The fact that Evelyn was involved was particularly rich. Julia's older sister had spent years pretending to be neutral in family drama, playing the role of the sensible one who stayed out of conflicts. But apparently, even Switzerland had picked a side in this war. Wednesday morning brought the most obvious sign, yet that something was brewing. I came downstairs to find Margaret sitting at my kitchen table at 7:30 in the morning, fully dressed, and made up like she had a job interview, drinking coffee and reading through what looked suspiciously like legal documents. "Morning, Margaret," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee and trying to act like finding my mother-in-law in my kitchen before 8 a.m. was totally normal. "Oh, good morning, dear," she said, quickly flipping the papers over so I couldn't see what she was reading. "I hope you don't mind. Julia gave me a key so I could help with the birthday preparations." Birthday preparations that required her to be here at dawn, apparently, and that involved reading legal documents. Sure, that made perfect sense. "Anything I can help with?" I offered, just to watch her squirm. "Oh no, she said quickly, gathering up her papers and stuffing them into her purse like they were state secrets. "It's a surprise, remember? You just focus on being excited for tomorrow night." Being excited for tomorrow night. Right. I should be thrilled about my own execution. The whole day continued like that. Marcus showed up around lunchtime, supposedly to hang out, but actually to scope out the situation and probably coordinate final details. He kept looking at me like he was trying to memorize my face, which was creepy as hell. "So, 38, huh?" he said while we were both in the kitchen grabbing beers. "Big year coming up." "I guess," I replied. "Though honestly, birthdays don't feel as important once you hit your 30s. "Oh, I don't know about that," Marcus said with this weird smirk. "I think this one's going to be pretty memorable for you." Memorable? Yeah, I bet it would be. That evening, Julia announced that we were going to River Song Bistro for my birthday dinner, which was interesting because Julia had always said the place was overpriced and pretentious. When I'd suggested going there for our anniversary last year, she'd rolled her eyes and said we couldn't afford to waste money on fancy restaurants that charge $15 for a salad. But apparently, my birthday was special enough to justify the expense. Or maybe they figured it was worth the cost to have a public venue for their big performance. I made reservations for 6 people, Julia said, which was also suspicious because our usual family dinners were just the 3 of us. Me, Julia, and whatever toxic energy Margaret brought to the table. 6 people? I asked. Well, Mom, of course. And Marcus. And Evelyn said she could make it, which is great because you know how busy she's been with work. Plus her husband, Dave. The whole gang, in other words. Everyone who'd been whispering behind my back for months, all gathered together to witness whatever grand finale they had planned. Should be fun, I said, and Julia's face lit up like I'd just agreed to donate a kidney. Oh, it will be, she said. Mom has put so much thought into this. She really wants to make sure it's a night you'll never forget. A night I'd never forget. The woman who'd spent 5 years treating me like a disappointment was suddenly concerned about making my birthday memorable. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Wednesday night, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous. I was way past nervous and well into that calm, almost zen-like state that comes right before a major battle. I lay in bed listening to Julia breathe beside me, probably dreaming about her new life with Marcus's corporate friends, and I felt nothing but pity for how completely she'd underestimated me. They thought they were so clever, so strategic. They'd spent weeks planning this elaborate takedown, coordinating schedules, getting their legal ducks in a row, probably even practicing their lines in the mirror. Margaret had probably been fantasizing about this moment for years, the night she'd finally get to destroy the son-in-law who'd never been good enough for her precious daughter. But what they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that their victim had been preparing for this war longer than they'd been planning it. While they were focused on their little birthday ambush, I'd been building the kind of defense system that could withstand a nuclear attack. Thursday morning arrived gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for what was supposed to be the day my old life ended. Julia woke up practically vibrating with excitement, humming again while she got ready for her morning workout. "Happy birthday, honey," she said, giving me a kiss that felt more like a goodbye than a celebration. "Thanks," I said, looking forward to tonight. And you know what? I really was. Because while Julia and Margaret and the rest of the Collins family were planning to end my story, I was about to show them that they'd actually written the first chapter of theirs. Game time was finally here. Riversong Bistro on a Thursday night was exactly what you'd expect from a restaurant that charges $28 for chicken breast and calls it artisanal. The lighting was dim enough to hide the disappointment in your wallet. The music was that generic jazz that's supposed to make you feel sophisticated, and the waitstaff moved around like they were personally offended that you couldn't afford to eat somewhere better. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, this overpriced den of culinary pretension was about to become the stage for the most spectacular family drama in recent Collins history. We arrived fashionably on time, because God forbid the Collins family show up anywhere without making an entrance. And I have to admit, watching everyone try to act normal was better entertainment than anything they could have put on the menu. Marcus kept checking his watch like he was timing a bomb. Evelyn looked like she was attending a funeral, and Dave, Evelyn's husband, just seemed confused about why he'd been dragged into whatever this was. Margaret, of course, was in full performance mode. She'd dressed for the occasion in what I can only describe as courtroom chic, a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, paired with the kind of jewelry that screamed, "I have money, and I'm not afraid to use it as a weapon." "Doesn't everyone look wonderful tonight?" she announced as we settled into our seats, like we were at a wedding instead of what was clearly going to be a public execution. Julia was practically bouncing in her chair, fidgeting with her phone and positioning it at different angles. At first, I thought she was just being her usual social media-obsessed self, but then I noticed she kept angling the camera toward me. This wasn't Instagram content she was planning. This was evidence collection. "Are you recording something?" I asked, just to watch her panic. "Oh, just some family memories," she said, giving me that fake smile again. "You know how I like to document special occasions." Special occasions. Right. Like my execution was going to make it into the family photo album. The appetizers arrived, and I have to give the Collins family credit. They committed to the performance. Margaret ordered the most expensive starter on the menu. Marcus launched into some story about his latest work triumph, and Evelyn actually managed to carry on a conversation about her kids' soccer season without looking like she was about to throw up. But I could see the tension underneath it all. The way Julia kept glancing at her mother, waiting for some kind of signal. The way Marcus would start to say something and then catch himself, like he was afraid of spoiling the surprise. The way Evelyn kept looking at me with this guilty expression, like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. Dave, bless his heart, was completely oblivious to the undercurrents. He just sat there eating bread and making small talk about the weather, probably wondering why his wife had insisted he dress up for dinner with her weird in-laws. So, Margaret said as our entrees arrived, and something about her tone made everyone stop talking at once. I think this is the perfect time for birthday gifts. Here we go. Showtime. The whole table went quiet except for the soft jazz and the murmur of other diners who had no idea they were about to witness something that would probably end up as a story people told at parties for years to come. Margaret reached into her purse, the same purse she'd been clutching all week like it contained nuclear launch codes, and pulled out that pink butterfly envelope. The same envelope I'd washed her stuff full of legal documents 3 days earlier. The same envelope that Julia thought was going to ruin my life. From all of us, Margaret announced, standing up and holding the envelope like she was presenting an Academy Award. Her voice carried just enough to make the nearby tables turn and look, which was probably exactly what she wanted. Julia's phone was definitely recording now, and I could see Marcus leaning forward with barely contained excitement. Evelyn looked like she might be sick, and Dave just seemed confused about why everyone was acting so weird about a birthday card. I took the envelope, and I have to admit, there was something almost ceremonial about the moment. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, years of resentment, and probably decades of Margaret's disappointment in her daughter's choice of husband. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, weighted down with all their hopes and expectations. They wanted me to fall apart, to beg, to make a scene that would justify everything they'd done and everything they thought about me. Instead, I opened it like it was any other birthday card. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words jumped off the page in bold, official letters. Below that, a bunch of legal jargon that basically boiled down to, Julia wants half your stuff and monthly payments for the rest of your natural life. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Julia had stopped pretending to eat and was holding her phone steady, recording my reaction for posterity. Marcus was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Margaret stood there like a prosecutor who'd just presented the smoking gun that would convict the defendant. And you know what I did? I signed the papers, right there at the table, using the same Mont Blanc pen Julia had given me for Christmas. I signed every page that required my signature, neat and legible, like I was endorsing a check. The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant, which was impressive considering the ambient noise of 30 other conversations happening around us. Julia's phone slipped from her hands and clattered onto the table. Marcus's grin disappeared so fast, it was like someone had hit a reset button on his face. Evelyn actually gasped, and Dave looked around the table like he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke he wasn't getting. But Margaret was the best. The woman who'd orchestrated this entire performance, who'd probably spent weeks imagining my humiliation, just stood there with her mouth hanging open like she'd forgotten how to speak. "Thank you," I said, sliding the signed papers back into the pink envelope and handing it to Margaret. This is exactly what I needed. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and dropped a $100 bill on the table, more than enough to cover my share of the meal and the tip. "This should take care of everything," I said, straightening my jacket. "And Margaret, I have to say, this was perfectly planned. Really, just perfect timing." The entire restaurant was watching now. Other diners had stopped their conversations to stare at our table, probably trying to figure out what kind of family drama they'd just witnessed. The waitstaff was hovering nearby, unsure whether they should intervene or just let the show continue. Julia finally found her voice. That's it. You're not going to fight this? You're not going to try to work things out?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but pity. She'd spent so much time planning my destruction that she'd never considered the possibility that I might actually want to be destroyed. That her divorce papers weren't a weapon, but a gift. Fight what, Julia? Your happiness? If this is what you want, then congratulations. You got it. Marcus started to say something, probably trying to salvage whatever this was supposed to accomplish, but I cut him off. Marcus, tell your friend David that Julie is going to be a wonderful addition to his marketing team. I'm sure she'll fit right in. The look of shock on his face was priceless. They thought they'd been so clever, so secretive. They had no idea that I'd been listening to their phone calls and planning sessions for weeks. I walked toward the exit, leaving behind a table full of people who'd just realized their brilliant plan had somehow backfired spectacularly. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispers, chairs scraping, and the sound of Margaret trying to explain to the other diners that everything was fine, just a family misunderstanding. But as I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the cool evening air, I couldn't help but smile. Act 1 was complete. Now it was time for my encore. I was halfway to my car when I heard the restaurant doors slam behind me and footsteps on the pavement. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to let them stew in their confusion while I drove home and celebrated my newfound freedom with that bottle of Macallan. But the other part of me, the part that had been planning this moment for weeks, knew it was time for the grand finale. I turned around to see Julia practically running toward me, her face flushed and her eyes wide with something that looked suspiciously like panic. Wait, she called out. We need to talk about this. Talk about what? I asked, genuinely curious. You got exactly what you wanted. Divorce papers, signed and delivered. What's left to discuss? Behind her, the rest of the Collins family was spilling out of the restaurant like refugees fleeing a disaster zone. Margaret looked shell-shocked. Marcus kept running his hands through his hair, and Evelyn was trying to comfort Dave, who still seemed completely lost about what had just happened. This isn't how it was supposed to go, Julia said, and there was something almost childish in her voice, like she was complaining that I'd ruined her birthday party by not crying when she broke my favorite toy. How was it supposed to go exactly? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Were you expecting me to beg? Maybe cause a scene? Give you something dramatic to show your friends? Julia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Behind her, I could see Margaret approaching with the kind of determined stride that suggested she was about to try to take control of a situation that had already spiraled way beyond her ability to manage. Actually, I said, hitting the call button, since we're all here, this seems like the perfect time to clear up a few misconceptions. Rebecca Martinez answered on the second ring, because that's the kind of lawyer you get when you pay premium rates for premium service. Rebecca, it's done. They went through with it, just like we predicted. How do you want to handle the press release? She asked, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Press release, Julia whispered, and I realized the whole family had crowded close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. Let's go with the full package, I told Rebecca. Business valuation, government contracts, the works. And make sure you include the part about the charitable foundation we discussed. I hung up and looked at the circle of confused faces surrounding me. It was like Christmas morning, except instead of presents under the tree, I was about to unwrap 5 years of carefully hidden success. What press release? Margaret demanded, and for the first time since I'd known her, she actually looked uncertain. Instead of answering, I pulled out a manila envelope from my car, the same envelope I'd been carrying around for 3 days, waiting for exactly this moment. Inside were copies of everything Rebecca had prepared: Ridgewell Solutions' latest financial statements, the Department of Defense contract documentation, and my personal net worth analysis that would make their heads spin. Since we're sharing family paperwork tonight, I said, handing Margaret the envelope, I thought you might be interested in seeing what my small business actually looks like these days. Margaret opened the envelope with shaking hands, and I watched her face change as she read the first page. The color drained from her cheeks, her mouth fell open, and for a moment I thought she might actually faint right there on the sidewalk. $75 million, she whispered. That's just the government contract, I said cheerfully. The total company valuation is on page 3. Julia grabbed the papers from her mother's hands, scanning them frantically like she was looking for some kind of mistake or joke. When she got to the company valuation, $75 million and change, she actually stumbled backward. But you said, she started, then stopped. probably realizing that I'd never actually said anything about my business being small. That had been their assumption, their dismissive characterization, their way of making themselves feel superior. I said what? I asked. When did I ever tell you my company wasn't successful? Marcus snatched the papers next, his corporate-trained eyes scanning the financial data with the kind of desperate intensity of someone who'd just realized he'd been making fun of a guy who could buy and sell his entire company without breaking a sweat. This can't be right, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Oh, it gets better, I said, pulling out my phone again. Rebecca, could you send over those trust documents we discussed? I think my family would be interested to know where all that money is going. I hung up and smiled at their horrified faces. Did I mention that I updated my will last week? Everything goes to my niece Lily. Every penny. She's going to be quite wealthy when she turns 25. The silence that followed was even better than the one in the restaurant. Julia looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Margaret appeared to be having some kind of existential crisis, and Marcus was still staring at the financial documents like he could change the numbers through sheer force of will. You planned this, Margaret finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I replied, walking toward my car. You did. You spent months plotting to get rid of the disappointing son-in-law, and congratulations, you succeeded. I'm free, I'm richer than ever, and thanks to that lovely pink envelope, I don't owe any of you a damn thing. I got in my car and rolled down the window for one final word. Oh, and Julia, good luck with that marketing job. I'm sure Marcus's friend will be very understanding when he finds out you just walked away from a $75 million marriage. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, still standing there in the parking lot, probably trying to figure out how their brilliant plan had just made me the happiest man in the city. Walking out of Riversong Bistro that night wasn't just leaving a restaurant. It was stepping out of a prison I'd been living in for 5 years without even realizing the bars were there. The cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I could actually breathe. I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past all those perfect houses with their perfect lawns and their perfect families, and I couldn't stop laughing. Not the bitter, angry kind of laughter that comes when your world falls apart, but the genuine, from-the-belly kind that happens when you realize you've just won a game you didn't even know you were playing. The house felt different when I walked through the door. It was still the same overpriced colonial that Julia had insisted we needed to fit in with the neighborhood, still filled with the same furniture that Margaret had helped pick out, because family homes should reflect family values. But now it felt like what it really was, a stage set for a play that had finally ended. I poured myself that glass of Macallan I'd been promising myself and settled into my recliner. The one piece of furniture in the entire house that Julia had never managed to redecorate or replace with something more appropriate. Sitting there in the dark, sipping whiskey that cost more than most people's car payments, I tried to process what had just happened. They'd actually done it. After months of plotting and planning, weeks of secretive phone calls and conspiratorial meetings, they'd actually gone through with their elaborate scheme to destroy me publicly. And in doing so, they'd handed me the most beautiful gift imaginable, complete, total, irrevocable freedom from their toxic little dynasty. My phone started buzzing around midnight. Text messages from Julia, starting out angry and demanding, then shifting to confused and pleading, then finally settling into desperate bargaining. We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean for it to happen like this. Can we please just discuss this like adults? I didn't answer any of them. What was there to discuss? They'd made their position crystal clear at dinner, and I'd accepted their terms completely. The only thing left was the paperwork, and Rebecca would handle that. The next few days were like Christmas morning extended into a long weekend. I woke up each day with this ridiculous grin on my face, unable to quite believe that I was actually free. No more family dinners where I was the punchline. No more Margaret's condescending comments about my cute little company. No more pretending to laugh at Marcus's corporate war stories or listening to Julia complain about how boring her life was. Rebecca called on Saturday morning with an update that made my day even better. The divorce papers they filed are actually going to work in our favor, she said, and I could hear the predatory satisfaction in her voice. They're asking for alimony based on your declared income from last year, which was essentially zero since everything was structured as corporate distributions. and they want half of your personal assets, which according to our documentation, amounts to about $15,000 in checking accounts and a car that's worth maybe 20 grand. What about the house? Corporate property, remember? You're technically a renter now. They can't touch it. I spent that weekend doing all the things I'd wanted to do, but couldn't because Julia would complain or Margaret would make some snide comment. I ordered pizza for breakfast, watched sports all day without having to share the remote, and played music loud enough that the neighbors probably thought I was having a midlife crisis. Maybe I was. But if so, it was the best damn midlife crisis in history. Monday morning brought the first real sign that the Collins family was starting to understand the magnitude of their fuck-up. Margaret showed up at my office, the first time she'd ever bothered to visit Ridgewell Solutions, looking like she'd aged about 10 years since Thursday night. My receptionist, Sarah, buzzed me from the front desk. "There's a Margaret Collins here to see you. She says it's urgent. Tell her I'm in meetings all day," I said. "And Sarah? If she comes back, I'm in meetings all week." But Margaret was persistent, I'll give her that. She waited in the lobby for 3 hours, probably hoping I'd cave and agree to see her. When that didn't work, she started calling every day, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that went from demanding to pleading to downright pathetic. "Please, we need to talk about this misunderstanding. Julia is devastated. She never wanted things to go this far. Maybe we can work something out that's fair for everyone." Julia's calls were even better. She'd gone from angry to confused to desperate in record time, probably as she started to understand what she'd actually thrown away. The messages got longer and more rambling as the days went on, like she was trying to talk herself into believing this was all some kind of mistake that could be fixed with the right combination of words. "I know you're upset, but we can fix this. Mom was just trying to help. She thought you'd be happier without the stress of marriage. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought this was what you wanted too. Please call me back. We need to discuss the practical aspects of this situation." The practical aspects. Right. Like how she was going to explain to her new corporate friends that she'd just walked away from more money than they'd ever see in their lifetimes. 2 weeks after my birthday dinner from hell, I closed on the penthouse. 42nd floor, downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave me a view of the entire city. The kind of place that screamed success so loudly you could hear it from the street. Moving day was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. Packing up 5 years of marriage, sorting through all the accumulation of a life I'd never really wanted, deciding what was worth keeping and what could be left behind for Julia to deal with. The photo albums went in the trash. The wedding gifts from Margaret's friends went to charity. The furniture that Julia had picked out to impress her mother got donated to a homeless shelter, where it would actually serve a purpose. I kept 3 things from the house: my clothes, my books, and that recliner. Everything else was just props from a play I was never auditioning for again. The penthouse felt like coming home in a way that suburban colonial never had. Clean lines, modern furniture, space to breathe and think without someone else's opinion about how I should live my life. I set up my home office in the room with the best view, looking out over the city I'd conquered while my ex-family thought I was failing. Julia tried visiting once, about a month after I'd moved out. The doorman called up to announce her, and I could hear the desperation in his voice as he relayed her message. "She says it's very important, Mr. Ridgewell. Something about urgent family matters." "Tell her there are no family matters anymore," I said. "And if she comes back, call security." That was 6 months ago. 6 months of waking up every morning in my own space, making my own decisions, living my own life without someone else's family treating me like a disappointment. 6 months of building my business even bigger, traveling to places Julia always said were too expensive or too impractical, and rediscovering who I was when I wasn't trying to live up to someone else's expectations. The irony is perfect. Margaret spent 5 years trying to convince Julia that she'd married beneath her station, that I was holding her back from the life she deserved. And in the end, she was right. I was holding Julia back. But not from success or happiness or any of the things Margaret thought mattered. I was holding her back from finding out exactly how much money she could have walked away from if she'd just treated her husband with basic respect. Their envelope, meant to destroy me, had given me exactly what I wanted all along. A life where I didn't have to pretend to be grateful for their contempt. Freedom, finally. And it felt fucking fantastic. My wife, the CEO, spat on my face and slided the paper across. Accept the 90% salary reduction, or I'll find someone who will. Just to embarrass me in front of her new 22-year-old lover and staff. I need 20 hours, I said calmly. That night, I called the company's biggest competitor. Turns out, they'd been waiting for me to. You know how they say you never see the knockout punch coming? Well, I sure as hell didn't see this one. There I was, sitting in our mahogany boardroom at Argonne Ventures, the same room where Cassandra and I used to dream about changing the world, back when we were broke 20-somethings with nothing but ambition and cheap coffee. Now, 15 years later, that same room felt like a damn courtroom, and I was about to get sentenced. The morning had started normal enough. I'd grabbed my usual black coffee from the lobby cafe, exchanged pleasantries with Maria at the front desk, and walked through the glass doors of the company we'd built from scratch. Our company. At least, that's what I still foolishly believed. The nameplate on my office door still read Co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer. But hell, those were just words on brass at this point. I should have known something was off when I walked into the boardroom and saw all 12 department heads already seated. Usually, these quarterly strategy meetings were just Cassandra, myself, and maybe 3 senior staff. But today, every single person who mattered at Argonne was there, sitting around that polished table like they were waiting for a show to start. And damn if I wasn't about to be the main attraction. Cassandra stood at the head of the table in her power suit, the charcoal gray one that made her look like she could buy and sell small countries. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun she'd started wearing ever since she decided being so meant looking like she could freeze hellfire with a glance. But it was the smirk on her face that should have been my first real warning. That wasn't the smile of the woman I'd married 12 years ago. That was the smile of a predator who'd been circling wounded prey. And there, right beside her like some kind of designer accessory, was Trent, 22 years old, fresh out of business school, with perfectly styled brown hair and a jawline that probably cost his daddy's insurance a fortune in orthodontics. Strategy advisor, my ass. Everyone in that room knew exactly what kind of advising he was doing, and it sure as hell wasn't happening in any conference room. Thanks for joining us, Cassandra said, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she used when she was about to drop a bomb. I know this is unusual, calling everyone together like this, but I felt it was important that our entire leadership team witness this conversation. Witness, not participate, not contribute. Witness, like I was about to confess to a crime or something. I kept my mouth shut and waited. In business, just like in poker, the first person to speak usually loses. But Cassandra had always been better at reading tells than I was. We need to discuss your compensation package, she continued, walking slowly around the table like she was giving a lecture. The board has been reviewing performance metrics, and frankly, we're not seeing the return on investment we need from your current role. The room got so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. I glanced around at faces I'd known for years, people I'd hired, mentored, fought alongside in the trenches when we were trying to land our first major contract. Now they were all staring at their hands or their laptops, anywhere but at me. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, keeping my voice level. Never let them see you sweat. That's what my old man used to say. That's when she did it. Cassandra reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She walked over to where I was sitting, looked me dead in the eye, and then, I swear to God, she spit right in my face. Not a little fleck of saliva from talking too enthusiastically. A deliberate, calculated glob of spit that landed on my left cheek and started dripping down toward my collar. The entire room collectively held its breath. I could feel 12 pairs of eyes watching to see how I'd react. Would I explode? Would I storm out? Would I grab her by the shoulders and demand to know what the hell had happened to the woman I'd built a life with? Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my handkerchief, the navy blue one with my initials that Cassandra had given me for our 5th anniversary, and calmly wiped my face. I folded the handkerchief, put it back in my pocket, and looked up at her like she'd just handed me a cup of coffee. She slid the paper across the polished table. It landed right in front of me with a soft whisper of sound that somehow felt louder than a gunshot. Accept the 90% salary reduction, or I'll find someone who will, she said, her voice carrying just enough volume for everyone to hear clearly. You've got until tomorrow morning to decide. 90%. From 250,000 a year down to 25 grand. That wasn't a salary cut. That was a humiliation ritual. That was her way of saying I was worth less than the kid who delivered our lunch orders. I unfolded the paper and read through the terms. It was all legal and proper, signed by the board, witnessed by the company attorney. Everything by the book, except for the part where my own wife had just treated me like something she'd scrape off her shoe in front of our entire executive team. Trent was practically glowing beside her, that smug little smile playing at the corners of his mouth, like he was watching his favorite movie. This wasn't just about money or business strategy. This was personal. This was Cassandra making sure everyone in that room knew exactly where I stood in the new hierarchy. I need 20 hours, I said quietly, folding the paper and slipping it into my jacket pocket next to the handkerchief. 20 hours, she agreed. Not a minute more. I stood up, straightened my tie, and looked around the room one more time. These people, Maria from HR, Jenkins from operations, Sarah from marketing, they'd all worked with me for years. Some of them owed their careers to recommendations I'd made. Now they couldn't even make eye contact. I'll have an answer for you by 10 a.m. tomorrow, I said. I walked out of that boardroom with my head high and my back straight, just like my father taught me when I was 8 years old and Tommy Richardson was calling me names on the playground. Never let them see you break. Save that for when you're alone. But I wasn't thinking about crying or breaking down. As I walked past Maria's desk and through those glass doors, past the company logo we designed together on a napkin in a dive bar downtown, I felt something else entirely. Something had shifted inside me, like a gear clicking into place after years of grinding against nothing. That wasn't just disrespect back there. That was a declaration of war. And Cassandra had made one critical mistake. She'd forgotten that I knew where all the bodies were buried. I sat in my car in the parking garage for God knows how long after walking out of that boardroom. The engine was off, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the key and drive anywhere that mattered. Home felt like enemy territory now, and the office, well, that wasn't mine anymore either, was it? So I just sat there like some kind of pathetic statue, staring at the concrete wall in front of me, and trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to my life. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't want to read. Probably Cassandra, probably her lawyer, probably someone wanting to twist the knife a little deeper. I turned the damn thing off and shoved it in the glove compartment like it might bite me. When I finally did start the car, I had no destination in mind. I just drove through downtown, past the coffee shop where Cassandra and I used to meet before we were married, past the park where we'd take Zuri when she was little and still thought her daddy hung the moon. Every street held some memory of better times, back when we were a team instead of whatever the hell we'd become. I ended up on the interstate, just following the flow of traffic like a piece of driftwood caught in a current. The sun was setting, painting the sky all orange and pink, the kind of sunset that used to make me feel grateful for the life I'd built. Now it just looked like the world was on fire. 3 hours later, I pulled into the parking lot of some 24-hour truck stop diner off Route 46. The kind of place that's seen better decades, where the coffee's strong enough to wake the dead and nobody asks too many questions about why you're eating pie at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The neon sign flickered Mel's Diner in letters that had probably been bright red some time back when Reagan was president. Inside, the place was exactly what you'd expect. Cracked vinyl booths, checkerboard linoleum that had seen a million spilled cups of coffee, and the persistent smell of bacon grease that had soaked into every surface. There were maybe 6 other customers scattered around. A trucker working on a plate of meatloaf, 2 college kids sharing a basket of fries, and an old guy at the counter nursing what looked like his 10th cup of coffee. I slid into a corner booth and tried to blend into the scenery. The waitress came over after a few minutes. A woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag said Brenda. "What can I get you, sir?" she asked, and something about the way she said sir hit me right in the chest. Not sarcastic, not condescending, just genuine respect for a customer she'd never seen before and would probably never see again. "Just coffee," I said. "Black." "You sure? Kitchen's still open. Mel makes a mean apple pie." I almost said no, but something about her warm smile made me reconsider. "You know what? Yeah, pie sounds good." She brought the coffee first, hot, strong, and served in one of those thick white mugs that probably weighed half a pound empty. Then came the pie, a generous slice with a flaky crust and apples that actually tasted like they'd been picked from a tree instead of processed in some factory. "This is really good," I told her when she came by to refill my cup. "Don't sound so surprised," she laughed. "Mel's been making that same pie for 32 years. Figure he's got it down by now." It was the first genuine conversation I'd had in weeks. Not some calculated business exchange or careful navigation around Cassandra's increasingly hostile territory. Just two people talking about pie like it was the most natural thing in the world. I ended up staying there until almost 2 in the morning, nursing coffee and picking at that slice of pie while my mind wandered through the wreckage of the day. Brenda checked on me every so often, never pushy, never trying to get me to order more or hurry up and leave. She just let me exist in that little bubble of normalcy while the rest of my world felt like it was collapsing. Around 1:30, she brought me a fresh cup without being asked and sat down across from me for a minute during the late-night lull. "Rough day?" she asked. "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" I considered it for a moment. Part of me wanted to spill the whole damn story to this stranger who had no stake in my drama, no reason to judge or take sides. But instead, I just shook my head. Not much to say. Just one of those days when you realize the person you thought had your back was actually holding the knife. Brenda nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "Been there," she said simply. "The good news is, tomorrow's a new day. Things look different in the morning light sometimes." When I finally left Mel's diner, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, like I was still a human being worth treating with basic decency. Brenda had called me sir, and meant it. She'd served me coffee and pie without any agenda, any manipulation, any power games. For 3 hours, I'd been just another customer, not a liability to be managed or an obstacle to be removed. I drove home in the early morning darkness, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my driveway, looking at the house Cassandra and I had bought 8 years ago when Argonne first started turning a real profit. The windows were dark, everyone asleep, no sign of the war that had been declared in that boardroom. But I knew now that I couldn't just walk back into that house and pretend nothing had changed. Cassandra had made her choice, drawn her battle lines. The question was, what was I going to do about it? That night, sitting in my driveway at 3 a.m., I made my first real decision since this whole nightmare started. I wasn't going to fight back loud and messy. I was going to rise quiet and deadly. 3 in the morning. That's when desperation and clarity tend to collide in a way that changes everything. I was still sitting in my driveway, engine off, staring at the dark windows of what used to feel like home. The house looked peaceful enough, white colonial with black shutters, perfectly manicured lawn that our landscaper Miguel kept pristine. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. From the inside, we were more like a slow-motion car crash. My phone had been buzzing intermittently from the glove compartment where I'd shoved it hours earlier. Probably Cassandra wondering where the hell I was, though knowing her, she was probably too busy celebrating her little power play with Boy Wonder Trent to notice I hadn't come home. The thought of them together made my stomach turn, but not with jealousy anymore, with something colder, more calculating. I retrieved the phone and scrolled through the missed calls and texts. 3 from Cassandra, all variations of "Where are you?" and "We need to talk." 2 from my attorney, probably wanting to discuss the legal implications of that document she'd slid across the table. And 1 from a number I didn't recognize, which I ignored. But then I stopped scrolling and stared at a contact I hadn't called in over 2 years, Jonas Herrera. Jonas. Man, I hadn't thought about him in months, but suddenly his name felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. We had history, the good kind. I'd hired him as a junior analyst about 6 years back, when he was fresh out of Northwestern, all eager energy and raw talent. Kid was sharp as a tack, could see patterns in data that most seasoned professionals missed. I'd taken him under my wing, taught him how to read between the lines in financial reports, how to spot opportunities that others walked right past. When Velmont Tech tried to poach him 3 years ago with a VP of operations offer, I'd been proud as hell. I'd written his recommendation letter myself, told their CEO that Jonas was the kind of leader you build a company around. He'd called me before accepting, asking if I thought he should take it. Hell yes, I'd told him. You're ready for this. Go show them what you're made of. And show them he did. Under Jonas's leadership, Velmont had grown from a mid-tier competitor to a serious threat in our space. They'd landed 3 major contracts that I knew Argonne had been chasing, including that massive telecommunications deal with Morrison Industries that Cassandra was still pissed about losing. What made Jonas special wasn't just his analytical skills, it was his loyalty. The kid never forgot where he came from or who'd helped him get there. Every few months, he'd send me articles he thought I'd find interesting, industry insights, sometimes just a text asking how things were going. I'd always responded, kept that connection alive even though we were technically competitors now. More importantly, I knew Velmont had tried to recruit me. Twice. Once about 18 months ago when they were expanding their strategic planning division, and again 6 months back when they were looking for someone to head up their new West Coast operations. Both times, they'd gone through Jonas as an intermediary, feeling out whether I'd be interested in a conversation. Both times, I'd said no without even hearing the offer. Loyalty to Cassandra, to Argonne, to the company we'd built together. What a fucking joke that seemed like now. I stared at Jonas's name on my phone screen. 3 a.m. wasn't exactly normal business hours, but Jonas had always been a night owl. Back when he worked for me, some of his best insights came during those late-night sessions when the office was empty and his mind could wander through problems without distraction. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit call. 1 ring. 2 rings. I half expected it to go to voicemail. What kind of VP answers unknown calls at 3 in the morning? But on the 3rd ring, Jonas's familiar voice came through the speaker. Well, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. If it isn't the mentor himself. Though I gotta say, 3 a.m. is a new record for you. How do you know it was me? Are you kidding? I've had your number saved as the boss since the day I left Argonne. Plus, caller ID exists, old man. He chuckled, but there was warmth there, genuine affection. What's got you calling at this ungodly hour? Please tell me you're finally ready to have that conversation we've been dancing around for the past year and a half. That's when I knew Jonas had been waiting for this call. Maybe not at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, but he'd been waiting. Smart kid. No, smart man now. Had probably seen the writing on the wall at Argonne before I'd been willing to admit it to myself. I was hoping this day would come, he continued when I didn't immediately respond. Not because I wanted to see you get screwed over, but because I knew eventually you'd realize what everyone else in this industry already knows. Which is, that you're wasted at Argonne. Have been for years. You built that company, man, and then you let them turn you into middle management while your wife plays CEO with some kid who probably still gets carded at restaurants. The fact that Jonas knew about Trent shouldn't have surprised me. Industry gossip traveled fast, especially when it involved leadership drama at a company the size of Argonne. But hearing it confirmed that my humiliation was already public knowledge stung more than I'd expected. So, Jonas continued. What finally broke the camel's back? I gave him the abbreviated version, the boardroom ambush, the salary reduction demand, the very public humiliation. I left out the part about the spit. Some things were just too personal to share, even with someone I trusted. Jesus, Jonas said when I finished. That's cold, even for corporate warfare. Though honestly, I'm surprised it took this long. Word on the street has been that you've been getting iced out for months. Word on the street? Come on, you know how this works. Vendors talk, clients gossip, employees jump ship and spill everything to their new employers. Half the industry knows Cassandra's been systematically undermining your authority since she started banging the strategy advisor. There it was, laid out in stark terms. My professional reputation was already damaged goods, and I'd been too proud or too naive to see it happening. So what do you want to do about it? Jonas asked. I looked up at the dark windows of my house, thought about Zuri sleeping upstairs, probably dreaming about whatever 10-year-olds dream about. She deserved better th. Now you're talking. Can you meet me at 6 a.m.? 6 a.m. came faster than I expected. But hell, when you've been sitting in your driveway all night running scenarios through your head, time moves in weird ways. I'd finally gone inside around 4, grabbed a shower, and put on my best suit, the charcoal gray Armani that Cassandra had bought me for my 40th birthday, back when she still pretended to give a damn about making me look successful. If I was going to walk into the lion's den, I was going to look like I belonged there. I didn't bother with breakfast. My stomach was doing gymnastics, and coffee was about all I could handle. Besides, this wasn't a social call. This was business, the kind that could either save my career or blow it up completely. No middle ground, no safety net. Velmont Tech's headquarters looked like everything Argonne wanted to be, but never quite achieved. Sleek glass and steel rising 32 floors into the morning sky, with a lobby that screamed success without being obnoxious about it. Their logo, a stylized mountain peak, was etched into the marble wall behind the reception desk, subtle but unmistakable. This was a company that knew its worth and didn't need to shout about it. The security guard recognized my name on his list and handed me a visitor's badge without the usual corporate runaround. Jonas had smoothed the way, just like he used to do when he worked for me. Kid. Man, I had to stop thinking of him as a kid. Had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The elevator ride to the 28th floor gave me time to think about what I was really doing here. 12 hours ago, I'd been a co-founder and chief strategy officer of a successful venture capital firm. Now I was essentially a free agent, jobless in all but the technical sense, about to negotiate with our biggest competitor. If Cassandra found out about this meeting, she'd probably try to sue me for corporate espionage or some other bullshit charge her lawyers could dream up. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, there's nowhere to go but up. And I was done being afraid of Cassandra's lawyers, her tantrums, or her pathetic boy toys' smug little smirks. Jonas was waiting for me when the elevator doors opened, looking every inch the successful executive in his navy suit and crimson tie. He'd filled out since his analyst days, carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're good at what you do. But when he smiled and extended his hand, I saw echoes of that eager young guy who used to stay late just to pick my brain about market trends. "You look like hell," he said with a grin. "Thanks. You look like a VP. Funny how that works." He gestured toward a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Come on, let's talk somewhere private." The conference room was impressive without being intimidating. Polished oak table, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a view that made you feel like you were on top of the world. Jonas closed the door and activated some kind of privacy screen that frosted the glass walls. Whatever we were about to discuss, he wanted to make sure it stayed between us. "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing to a service cart that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. "Black, strong enough to wake the dead." He poured 2 cups and handed me one. The coffee was perfect, rich, smooth, with just enough bite to remind you that you were alive. Everything at Velmont seemed to be a subtle upgrade from what I was used to at Argonne. "So," Jonas said, settling into his chair and fixing me with that analytical stare I remembered from our old brainstorming sessions. "Before we dive into the fun stuff, I need to ask the obvious question. Are you actually free to have this conversation, or are we going to end up in some legal nightmare because of non-compete clauses?" I couldn't help but laugh. You know what's funny? Cassandra let my non-compete expire last year. Apparently, she was so confident that I'd never leave, she didn't bother renewing it. Her lawyers are probably shitting themselves right about now, assuming they've figured out where I am. Jonas's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "You're telling me that the woman who just tried to cut your salary by 90% forgot to lock you down legally? Ironic, isn't it? The CEO who's supposedly so much smarter than me made a rookie mistake that any first-year law student would catch." "Jesus Christ," Jonas muttered, shaking his head. "It's like she wanted you to walk." He reached into a leather portfolio and pulled out a manila folder that looked suspiciously thick. "Well, in that case, let's talk about your future. We've been watching your situation at Argonne for months, waiting for the right moment to approach you again. Yesterday's boardroom drama just accelerated our timeline." I raised an eyebrow. "You heard about that already? Are you kidding? Half the industry heard about it. Sarah Martinez from Morrison Industries called me personally this morning to ask if we were going to make you an offer. Apparently, she's not thrilled about working with Cassandra now that you're not involved in account management." That hit me right in the gut. Sarah and I had developed Morrison's expansion strategy together over 6 months of late-night conference calls and weekend strategy sessions. If she was already looking to jump ship from Argonne Services, Cassandra's power play was going to cost the company a lot more than my salary. Jonas slid the folder across the table. "Here's what we're prepared to offer." I opened it and felt my eyebrows climb toward my hairline. The title page read Senior Director of Global Expansion, Compensation Package, and Equity Structure. Below that was a salary figure that made my current pay look like pocket change. "Triple your reduced salary," Jonas said, watching my face. full authority over international development, your own team, and a benefits package that includes stock options tied to the contracts you bring in. Plus, we'll match your 401k contributions up to 15% and throw in a company car. I flipped through the pages, scanning the details. Health insurance that actually covered everything, for weeks paid vacation, and a performance bonus structure that could potentially double my base salary if I hit certain targets. It was everything I'd been trying to negotiate at Argonne for the past 3 years, handed to me on a silver platter. There's one more thing, Jonas said, pulling out another document. This is our non-compete agreement. Standard 2-year term, but with a twist. It specifically exempts Argonne Ventures from the restricted company list. I looked up at him. Meaning if you want to go head-to-head with your ex-wife's company and steal every client she's got, we're not going to stop you. In fact, we're counting on it. The offer was everything I could have hoped for and more. Respect, autonomy, financial security, and the chance to prove that Cassandra had made the biggest mistake of her professional life. All I had to do was sign on the dotted line and walk away from 15 years of building something with the woman I'd once loved. I picked up the pen Jonas had placed beside the folder. Any questions? He asked. Just one. When do I start? How about Monday? I signed my name with a flourish, each letter feeling like a small act of rebellion. When I handed the document back to Jonas, he was grinning like a shark who'd just spotted a school of fish. Welcome to Velmont Tech, he said. This is going to be fun. As I walked out of that building with a signed offer letter in my jacket pocket, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, hope. Not just for my career, but for my dignity, my self-respect, and my ability to show my daughter what it looked like when someone refused to stay down. Cassandra thought she'd checkmated me. She had no idea the game was just getting started. The next morning felt different. Not just because I'd barely slept, or because I had a signed offer letter from Velmont burning a hole in my jacket pocket. It felt different because for the first time in months, I wasn't walking into Argonne Ventures as a victim. I was walking in as a man who knew exactly what he was worth and where he was going. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. The navy blue suit Cassandra and I had bought together when we were pitching our first major investors 7 years ago. Back then, we'd been a team, finishing each other's sentences and presentations, tag-teaming potential clients like we'd been doing it our whole lives. The suit had been our lucky charm, the armor we wore when we needed to project confidence we didn't quite feel yet. Now it felt like a uniform for a different kind of battle. The morning routine at Argonne was exactly the same as always. Maria at the front desk with her cheerful "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." The elevator music that hadn't changed since we moved into this building, the familiar ding of the 22nd floor. But I wasn't the same man who'd left this place yesterday afternoon. Yesterday, I'd been someone who could be publicly humiliated and expected to just take it. Today, I was someone with options. I walked past my office, former office, really, without stopping. The nameplate was already gone, I noticed. Efficient as always, our facilities team. Probably had orders from Cassandra to erase any trace of me before I even made my decision about that ridiculous salary reduction. Her office door was closed, which meant she was either on a call or having another strategy session with Trent. I knocked once and walked in without waiting for permission. After 15 years together, professional and personal, I figured I'd earned the right to skip the formalities. Cassandra was sitting behind her desk, still in power mode with her hair pulled back and her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up from whatever document she was reviewing, and I saw something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe, or annoyance that I hadn't waited to be invited in. "You're early," she said, glancing at her watch. "I thought you'd need the full 20 hours to make such a difficult decision." Turns out it wasn't that difficult after all. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared that morning. Clean white paper, my resignation letter typed on official letterhead, dated and signed. I placed it on her desk with the same deliberate precision she'd used when sliding that salary reduction document across the boardroom table. "My resignation," I said simply. She stared at the envelope for a long moment, like it might explode if she touched it. Then she looked up at me with that calculating expression I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one that meant she was trying to figure out my angle, my weakness, my next move. "Running away?" she asked, leaning back in her chair with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No," I replied. "I'm stepping up." That's when I pulled out the second document, the signed offer letter from Velmont Tech. I didn't hand it to her, just held it up so she could see the letterhead, the official seal, the unmistakable weight of a real opportunity. Her eyes widened as she processed what she was looking at. The smirk disappeared completely, replaced by something I hadn't seen on Cassandra's face in years, genuine shock. "You can't," she said, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Actually, I can. You forgot something pretty important when you were planning your little boardroom coup yesterday." "What are you talking about?" "My non-compete clause. The one you let expire last year because you were so confident I'd never have the balls to leave." I tucked the offer letter back into my jacket. "Turns out your lawyers aren't as thorough as you thought they were." The color drained from her face as the implications hit her. She grabbed her phone and started scrolling frantically, probably looking for her attorney's number. But I knew she wouldn't find any legal recourse there. Jonas and I had been thorough. This was airtight. That's when the office door opened and Trent walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing that same smug expression he'd had in the boardroom yesterday. He was laughing about something, probably some inside joke between him and his older lover, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. "Morning, beautiful," he said to Cassandra, then noticed me standing there. His smile faltered slightly. "Oh, hey there, Chief. Didn't expect to see you here so early." "Chief." The condescending little shit actually called me Chief, like I was some aging security guard he could dismiss with fake friendliness. "Actually," I said, "I was just leaving. Permanently." I turned back to Cassandra, who was still staring at my resignation letter like it contained nuclear launch codes. "You know what's funny?" I continued. "Yesterday, you asked me to accept being worth $25,000 a year. Today, someone else decided I'm worth 3 times what I was making here, with equity and full authority over a division that's going to directly compete with everything you've built." Trent's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "Wait, what's happening here?" "What's happening?" I said, "is that your girlfriend just learned the difference between a chess move and a checkers move. She thought she was being clever, backing me into a corner. But all she really did was remind me that I'm too good for this place." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back one more time. "Oh, and Cassandra, you might want to call Sarah Martinez at Morrison Industries. I have a feeling she's going to have some questions about the continuity of her account management, now that the person who actually developed her expansion strategy won't be around to implement it." I could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes as she realized this wasn't just about losing me. It was about losing everything I brought to the table. The relationships, the institutional knowledge, the client trust that couldn't be replaced with PowerPoint presentations and MBA buzzwords. Trent was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match, finally starting to understand that his little victory lap yesterday had been premature. "You can't just walk away from everything we built together," Cassandra said. And for a moment, I heard an echo of the woman I'd married, the one who used to believe we were stronger together than apart. "We didn't build this together," I replied. "I built it and you took it. There's a difference." I walked out of that office, past the stunned faces in the hallway who'd probably heard at least part of our conversation, past Maria at the front desk who looked like she wanted to say something but didn't know what, and into the elevator that would take me away from Argon Ventures for the last time. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Trent in Cassandra's office, his coffee forgotten, gesturing wildly while she sat frozen behind her desk with my resignation letter still unopened in front of her. Neither of them were laughing anymore. They say news travels fast in the business world, but I had no idea just how fast until my phone started buzzing before I even made it to my car in the parking garage. The first text came from Angela Rodriguez at Orion Motors while I was still processing what had just happened in Cassandra's office. "Heard through the grapevine you left Argon. Call me when you get a chance. We should talk." Then Isaac from Foresight AI. "Is it true you're no longer with Argon? We've got some opportunities coming up that might interest you." By the time I reached my car, I had 6 messages from various contacts in the industry, all variations on the same theme. Word was already spreading that I'd walked away from the company I'd helped build, and people were reaching out like vultures circling fresh roadkill. Except in this case, they saw opportunity instead of carrion. The funny thing was, I hadn't contacted a single one of them. I hadn't posted anything on LinkedIn, hadn't sent out any announcements or networking emails. But somehow, Within an hour of walking out of Argon's offices, half my professional network knew I was available. That's when it hit me. Loyalty in this business doesn't follow companies or titles. It follows people. And apparently, more people had been paying attention to my contributions at Argon than I'd realized. I drove straight to Velmont Tech, where Jonas was waiting for me with a grin that could have powered the building's lights for a week. "How'd it go?" he asked as I walked into his office. "Better than expected." Cassandra looked like someone had just told her Christmas was canceled. "I'll bet." "And speaking of good news, we've already got your office set up on the 26th floor. Corner office, city view, the works. Plus, I've been making some calls this morning, and it looks like we're going to have plenty of opportunities to put your skills to work." Jonas handed me a cup of that excellent coffee and gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Madison Pierce from Lucretia Data called me about 20 minutes ago. Apparently, she's been working with Argon on a market expansion strategy, but she's not thrilled with the direction things are heading since you got sidelined." Madison. I remembered her, sharp as a whip, ran a data analytics company that had grown from a two-person startup to a major player in predictive modeling over the past 5 years. We'd worked together on 3 different projects, including the algorithm that helped her land that massive government contract last year. What did she say? That she'd rather work with the person who actually understood her business model than the people who just wanted to treat her like another line item in a portfolio. Her contract with Argon expires next month, and she's very interested in exploring alternatives. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a text. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately, David Kim from Nexus Financial. "You should probably take that," Jonas said, noticing me looking at the phone. "David," I answered. "How's business?" "It was fine until I heard you weren't with Argon anymore," came his familiar voice through the speaker. "Please tell me the rumors aren't true." David and I had worked together for almost 3 years, developing the investment strategy that had helped Nexus expand into the European markets. He was old school, the kind of guy who believed in handshake deals and long-term relationships over flashy presentations and quarterly reports. "Depends on which rumors you've heard. The one where Cassandra lost her damn mind and forced you out." I glanced at Jonas, who was trying not to look too interested in my conversation while obviously hanging on every word. "Let's just say we had a difference of opinion about my value to the organization." "Jesus Christ," David muttered. "That woman's going to run that company into the ground without you." "Look, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Are you planning to stay in the industry?" "As a matter of fact, I am. Just signed with Velmont Tech this morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Velmont? Jonas Herrera's outfit." "The very same." "Well, I'll be damned. In that case, we need to set up a meeting. I've go." Practically bouncing in his chair. "This is even better than I hoped," he said. "We figured it would take at least 6 months to build up your client base here. At this rate, you'll be fully booked by the end of the week." Over the next few hours, the calls and messages kept coming. Some were from existing Argon clients who were concerned about continuity on their projects. Others were from companies I'd worked with in the past who saw an opportunity to reconnect. A few were from competitors who wanted to explore partnership opportunities now that I wasn't tied to Argon's exclusivity agreements. By lunchtime, Jonas had assembled a small team to help me transition into my new role. First was Malik Johnson, my former project manager from Argon, who'd left 6 months earlier after getting frustrated with Cassandra's micromanagement style. He'd been working as a freelance consultant, but Jonas convinced him to come aboard full-time as my deputy director. "Man, I was hoping this day would come," Malik said when he walked into my new office. "Working for Cassandra without you there as a buffer was like trying to navigate a minefield blindfolded." Next was Serena Walsh from the finance department, a brilliant analyst who'd been underutilized at her previous firm. Jonas had recruited her specifically to support my division, knowing that the kind of complex international expansion projects I specialized in required someone who could model financial scenarios across multiple currencies and regulatory environments. Finally, there was Leo Chun, a creative director who'd been working on digital marketing strategies for tech startups. He was younger than the rest of us, probably fresh out of grad school, but his portfolio showed the kind of innovative thinking that could help us approach client challenges from angles our competitors wouldn't see coming. "So," Jonas said as we all gathered in the conference room for an impromptu strategy session, "what's our first move?" I looked around the table at these four talented professionals who'd chosen to bet their careers on my ability to deliver results. It was intimidating as hell, but also exhilarating in a way I hadn't felt in years. We're going to do something Argon never figured out how to do properly, I said. We're going to focus on solving our clients' actual problems instead of just trying to upsell them on services they don't need. Within 2 weeks, we'd converted 3 major accounts from Argon to Velmont, not through aggressive sales tactics or undercutting prices, but simply by demonstrating that we understood their businesses better than anyone else in the market. Cassandra's empire was starting to show cracks, and we'd barely gotten started. 3 months. That's all it took for Cassandra's house of cards to start tumbling down. I wasn't actively trying to destroy Argon. Hell, I was too busy building something better at Velmont to waste time on revenge plots. But when you remove the foundation from a structure, gravity takes care of the rest. The first sign of trouble came through Madison Pierce at Lucretia Data. She'd officially terminated her contract with Argon and signed with Velmont, bringing along a $2.3 million project that Cassandra had been counting on to boost their quarterly numbers. But Madison didn't just take her business elsewhere. She started talking to other CEOs in her network about why she'd made the switch. It's simple, she told anyone who'd listen. I need partners who understand my industry, not consultants who treat every client like they're selling the same widget. Argon used to have that kind of insight. Now they're just another cookie-cutter firm trying to apply generic solutions to specific problems. That kind of word-of-mouth poison spreads fast in our industry. Within weeks, 3 other clients had requested meetings to reassess their strategic partnerships. Corporate speak were shopping around for someone better. David Kim from Nexus Financial was next. His contract with Argon was locked in for another 6 months. But he found a creative way around it by bringing Velmont in as a secondary consultant on a new project that technically fell outside his existing agreement. The project was worth $1.8 million, and it was the kind of high-profile international expansion that would generate case studies and referrals for years to come. But the real damage wasn't just the money walking out the door, it was the reputation. In an industry built on relationships and trust, losing key clients sends a message that something's fundamentally wrong with your operation. Other potential clients start asking questions. Existing clients start wondering if they should be looking elsewhere. Staff members start updating their resumes. I heard about Argon's quarterly earnings report through Jonas, who'd gotten the information from Peter Rains, the chairman of Argon's board. The numbers were brutal: revenue down 18%, client retention at an all-time low, and profit margins that made their stock look like a penny stock waiting to happen. Cassandra tried to spin it during the earnings call with investors. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but Jonas played me the highlights over lunch at that Italian place near Velmont's offices. Market volatility, she kept saying. Temporary adjustment period. Strategic repositioning for long-term growth. All the corporate buzzwords that executives use when they're trying to explain why they've screwed up without actually admitting they've screwed up. But the investors weren't buying it. Neither were the board members. I could tell because Peter Rains called me directly on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing expansion proposals in my new corner office. What did she do? He asked without any pleasantries or small talk. Peter had always been direct. It's why he'd survived 30 years in venture capital without getting eaten alive by prettier talkers with weaker strategies. She forgot where the real value came from, I told him. The clients who just walked? The relationships that built those client connections in the first place. You can't just plug in a new strategy advisor and expect 15 years of trust and institutional knowledge to transfer over automatically. Peter was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him tapping his pen against his desk, the same nervous habit he'd had since I'd known him. The board's meeting tomorrow, he said finally. There are going to be some difficult conversations about leadership and direction. That's not my problem anymore, Peter. I know, but for what it's worth, I think you made the right call walking away when you did. Staying would have just made you complicit in the decline. A week later, the announcement came through industry newsletters and LinkedIn posts. Cassandra Thompson was stepping down as CEO of Argon Ventures to pursue new opportunities. The board had appointed Marcus Webb, their CFO, as interim CEO while they conducted a search for permanent leadership. I didn't celebrate when I heard the news. I didn't post anything on social media or call my contacts to gloat about how I'd been vindicated. I just kept working on the Morrison Industries expansion project that was going to establish Velmont as a serious player in the European markets. But I did do one thing. I sent flowers to the board's new interim CEO, a simple arrangement of white lilies with a card that read, "Focus on people, not headlines." The flowers weren't meant as a taunt or an insult. They were a reminder of something I'd learned the hard way. Businesses are built on relationships, not egos. You can have the best strategies in the world, but if you don't have people who trust you to execute them, you're just another consultant with a PowerPoint presentation. Cassandra had forgotten that lesson. She'd gotten so caught up in being the CEO, in having the title and the corner office and the young boyfriend who made her feel like she was still the smartest person in the room, that she'd lost sight of what actually made Argon valuable in the first place. It wasn't the brand name or the fancy offices or the impressive client list. It was the trust that individual people, clients, employees, partners, had placed in the company's ability to solve their problems. And that trust was tied to specific relationships, specific expertise, specific people who'd earned it through years of delivering results. When those people left, the trust went with them. Marcus Webb called me a few days after the flowers arrived, probably at Peter's suggestion. "Thank you for the advice," he said. "Both the written version and the implied version. Just trying to help. Any chance you'd consider coming back? I know it's a long shot, but the board authorized me to make you an offer." I looked out my office window at the city skyline, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. The humiliation in the boardroom, the late-night drive to nowhere, the diner conversation with Brenda that had helped me remember I was still human. The phone call to Jonas that had changed everything. "I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but I'm exactly where I need to be." I figured you'd say that, but I had to ask. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and started working on the quarterly report for Velmont's board. Revenue was up 47% since I joined, client satisfaction scores were at an all-time high, and we had a pipeline of projects that would keep us busy through the next 18 months. Cassandra's fall hadn't been my goal, but it had been inevitable once she'd chosen power over partnership, ego over excellence. The market has a way of correcting itself when companies lose sight of what actually creates value. I'd just helped speed up the process. I'd gotten into the habit of staying late at the office, partly because I was genuinely excited about the work we were doing at Velmont, and partly because going home still felt complicated. The house I shared with Cassandra and Zuri had become a weird kind of neutral territory where we maintained civility for our daughter's sake, while pretending the nuclear fallout from our professional lives hadn't contaminated our personal space. But that Thursday evening was different. I'd finished the Morrison Industries presentation ahead of schedule, and for once, the stack of emails in my inbox looked manageable instead of overwhelming. At 5:30, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going home early. The drive from downtown to our neighborhood in Westfield usually gave me time to mentally shift gears from work mode to dad mode. But today, I didn't need the transition time. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like the same person in both places. The guy who was kicking ass in the boardroom was the same guy who was about to walk through his front door, not some fractured version trying to juggle competing identities. I pulled into our driveway at 6:15, which was practically midday by my recent standards. Cassandra's car wasn't there, probably at another strategy meeting with Trent, though God knows what they were strategizing now that she was officially unemployed. The thought should have bothered me more than it did, but honestly, her absence made everything easier. The house smelled like tacos and homework, that particular combination of dinner prep and childhood that every parent knows by heart. I could hear music coming from the kitchen, some pop song that Zuri had probably heard on the radio and immediately decided was the soundtrack to her entire existence. "Zuri," I called out. "I'm home, Dad." Her voice carried surprise and genuine excitement, which hit me harder than it should have. When was the last time my 10-year-old daughter had been excited to see me come home? Usually, I was sneaking in after she'd gone to bed, leaving before she woke up, existing on the periphery of her daily life, like some kind of well-meaning ghost. I found her at the kitchen table, surrounded by colored pencils, markers, and sheets of construction paper. Her homework was pushed to one side, math worksheets that looked like they'd been completed in record time, so she could move on to more interesting projects. "What are you working on?" I asked, loosening my tie and sitting down across from her. Art project for Mrs. Rodriguez's class, she said, not looking up from the drawing she was carefully coloring. We're supposed to draw our families. My stomach did a little flip. Family drawings had become landmines over the past year. The last one she'd brought home had featured Cassandra and herself standing in front of our house, with me nowhere to be found. When I'd asked about it, Zuri had just shrugged and said she'd drawn the people who were actually around. That had stung more than any boardroom humiliation. But this time, when she held up the paper with pride, I was there. Center of the composition, even. A stick figure in a blue suit, my favorite navy one, standing between two other stick figures in front of a house that looked remarkably like ours, complete with Miguel's perfectly maintained lawn and the oak tree we planted when Zuri was 3. It's our family, she announced, as if I might not have figured that out. I studied the drawing more carefully. There was me, there was Zuri with her long brown hair and the gap-toothed smile she was slightly self-conscious about, and there was Cassandra, positioned slightly apart from us but still clearly part of the group. No Trent, I noticed. Whatever was happening between her mother and the strategy advisor, Zuri either didn't know about it or didn't consider it relevant to her definition of family. You put me back, I said, remembering that previous drawing where I'd been conspicuously absent. She nodded seriously, the way kids do when they're about to say something that cuts right to the heart of things without meaning to. You're around again, she said simply. Like, actually around. Not just sleeping here sometimes. Jesus. Out of the mouths of babes. I knelt down beside her chair, so we were at eye level. You noticed that I hadn't been around much? Dad, you were like a ghost for months. You'd come home after I went to bed, leave before I woke up, and even when you were here on weekends, you were always on your phone or your laptop or staring at nothing like your brain was somewhere else. The accuracy of her observation was devastating. I'd been so caught up in the drama at Argonne, so focused on trying to salvage my professional relationship with Cassandra, that I'd let my relationship with my daughter wither without even realizing it. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean for that to happen. I know, she said, adding some green to the tree in her drawing. But it's better now. You seem, I don't know, happier? Like you remember how to smile for real instead of that fake smile you use when grown-ups ask how you're doing. That observation hit me like a punch to the gut. My 10-year-old had been watching me closely enough to distinguish between my genuine expressions and my social masks. How long had I been walking around with a fake smile, going through the motions of being okay while everything fell apart around me? Are you happier? She asked, looking up from her drawing with those brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I thought about it for a moment. Was I happier? The divorce proceedings were going to be complicated and expensive. I was starting over professionally at an age when most people were thinking about consolidating their careers. My marriage was effectively over, even if we hadn't made it official yet. But sitting there in our kitchen, looking at a family drawing that included me for the first time in months, I realized the answer was yes. Yeah, kiddo, I think I am happier. Good, she said, adding a few more details to my stick figure suit. Because when you're happier, I'm happier. And when mom's not stomping around being angry all the time, she's happier too. It's like everybody can just be themselves instead of pretending to be okay when they're really not. I looked at this wise little human I'd helped create. This person who'd been quietly observing the adult drama swirling around her and drawing conclusions that were probably more accurate than anything the family therapist we'd seen briefly had come up with. You know what? I said, how about we order pizza and watch one of those movies you like? The ones with the singing and the dancing that make absolutely no sense to me, but seem to make you happy. Can we get the pizza with the weird vegetables you like? Absolutely. As Zuri carefully wrote her name in the corner of her family drawing, I felt something shift inside me. Not just relief or contentment, but actual joy. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what mattered most. Being Zuri's dad. Being present. Being real. I wasn't expecting her. 6 months had passed since Cassandra's unceremonious exit from Argonne, and we'd settled into a surprisingly functional routine of co-parenting through carefully scheduled exchanges and polite text messages. She'd moved into a downtown condo. I'd kept the house with Zuri, and we'd managed to avoid any face-to-face conversations beyond the absolutely necessary logistics of shared custody. So when my assistant Maria buzzed me at Velmont to let me know that Cassandra Thompson was in the lobby asking to see me, my first instinct was to assume there was some kind of emergency involving our daughter. Send her up, I told Maria, already reaching for my phone to check for missed calls or texts from Zuri's school. But when Cassandra stepped off the elevator onto Velmont's 26th floor, nothing about her body language suggested crisis mode. If anything, she looked diminished. Not physically. She was still the same tall, poised woman who could command attention just by walking into a room. But something in her presence had shrunk. The executive armor was gone, replaced by simple black slacks and a cream-colored blouse that made her look more like a job candidate than a former CEO. Nice office, she said when I met her at the elevator bank. Thanks. Coffee? Sure. I led her to my corner office, the one with the city view that Jonas had insisted I deserved. She sat in one of the client chairs across from my desk, while I poured 2 cups from the machine that had become my favorite perk of working at Velmont. So, I said, handing her the coffee and settling into my chair. What brings you to enemy territory? She managed a small smile at that. Is that what this is? I don't know. You tell me. Cassandra looked out the window for a moment, watching the traffic 26 floors below. When she turned back to me, I saw something I hadn't seen in her face for years. Uncertainty. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, she said quietly. About how everything fell apart. And I keep coming back to the same question. Why didn't you fight back? The question caught me off guard. I'd expected her to be here about Zuri, or maybe some legal detail related to our separation. I hadn't expected soul searching. I did fight back, I said. I just didn't swing. She frowned, trying to parse the distinction. What's the difference? Fighting back doesn't always mean hitting harder. Sometimes it means walking away from a fight you can't win and finding a better battlefield. But you could have made things difficult for me. I set down my coffee cup and really looked at her. This conversation felt surreal, like discussing strategy with a former opponent after the war was over and everyone had gone home. Why would I want to destroy something I'd helped create? Argonne wasn't just your company, Cassandra. It was our company. Just because you decided to push me out doesn't mean I wanted to see it burned down. But you did let clients leave. I didn't let them do anything. They made their own choices based on what they felt was best for their businesses. I never badmouthed Argonne, never tried to poach anyone, never even mentioned the details of why I left. People drew their own conclusions. She was quiet for a long time, turning her coffee cup in slow circles on the table beside her chair. You were always the better leader, she said finally. I see that now. The admission hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. I was never trying to compete with you for leadership, I replied. We were supposed to be partners. But I didn't see it that way, did I? I saw it as a zero-sum game where one of us had to be in charge and the other had to follow. Why? I asked. What changed? Because we didn't start out that way. Remember those early days when we'd finish each other's sentences in client meetings? When we'd stay up until 3 a.m. working through strategy problems because we were both so excited about what we were building. Her smile was sad now, tinged with something that might have been regret. I got scared, she said. Success was intoxicating, but it was also terrifying. Every new client, every expansion, every milestone just raised the stakes higher. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that I had to control everything to keep it from falling apart. Including me. Especially you. Because you were the one person whose opinion actually mattered to me, whose approval I'd built my confidence on. When I started doubting myself, I started resenting you for being the source of my strength instead of finding my own. I'd never heard Cassandra talk about her insecurities so directly. Throughout our marriage and our business partnership, she'd always projected confidence and certainty, even when I could sense the anxiety underneath. And Trent. She actually laughed at that, though there wasn't much humor in it. Trent was 22 years old and thought I was brilliant for reasons that had nothing to do with actual business acumen. Being around him made me feel powerful in a way that didn't require me to actually be competent. Where is he now? Probably telling some other older woman how brilliant she is. We lasted about 6 weeks after I left Argonne. Turns out being unemployed made me significantly less fascinating. There was a knock on my office door, and Maria poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but your 3 o'clock is here for the Morrison Industries follow-up. I glanced at my watch. The afternoon had gotten away from me. Give me 5 more minutes, I told Maria. When she closed the door, Cassandra was already standing up. I should go, she said. I didn't mean to take up so much of your day. Cassandra, I said as she reached for her purse. She paused, looking back at me. What are you going to do now? I'm not sure yet. I've had some offers, consulting work, interim executive positions. Nothing that really excites me, but nothing that pays the bills either. She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment I saw a flash of the old determination. I'll figure it out. I always do. As she walked toward the door, she stopped and turned back one more time. You were always meant to be more than what I let you be, she said quietly. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I just needed to walk away to realize it, I replied. After she left, I sat in my office for a few minutes before my next meeting, thinking about the woman I'd married and the woman who'd just walked out my door. They were the same person, but also completely different. Success and fear had twisted her into someone I barely recognized, and failure had apparently twisted her back into someone I remembered. It was the last time we ever spoke in person, and somehow, that felt exactly right. 1 year. That's how long it took to rebuild everything I thought I'd lost, and discover things I never knew I'd been missing. I was sitting in my office at Velmont Tech, but not the same one where Cassandra had visited me 6 months earlier. Jonas had promoted me to VP of Global Strategy, which came with a move to the 31st floor and a view that made you feel like you could see the entire world spread out below you. The morning sun was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in that golden light that makes even Monday mornings feel full of possibility. The quarterly report on my laptop showed numbers that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Revenue was up 63% since I joined Velmont, and my division alone had brought in 12 major contracts that were worth more than Argon's entire annual intake. Client satisfaction scores were hitting records that had the company's PR team scrambling to figure out how to publicize our success without sounding like we were bragging. But the best part wasn't the money or the recognition. It was how different everything felt. When I walked into client meetings now, I wasn't trying to prove myself or justify my existence. I was just solving problems for people who trusted me to deliver results. The work had become pure again, stripped of all the office politics and ego battles that had poisoned my last few years at Argon. My team had grown too. Malik was now director of operations for the entire international division. Serena had been promoted to senior financial analyst with her own staff, and Leo was building a creative department that was attracting talent from agencies across the city. We'd become the division that other departments wanted to collaborate with, the group that made everyone else's jobs easier instead of more complicated. But the real measure of success wasn't professional, it was personal. Zuri was thriving. The shared custody arrangement with Cassandra had settled into a rhythm that actually worked for everyone. Weekdays with me, weekends with her mom, holidays alternating, and no more tension-filled handoffs where our daughter had to navigate the emotional minefield between her parents. She was getting straight A's in school, had made the select soccer team, and most importantly, she seemed genuinely happy. Just last week, she'd asked if she could bring her friend Jessica over for dinner. When I'd said yes, she'd looked at me with surprise. Really? You're not going to be working late? Really? I'll even cook something that doesn't come from a takeout bag. Who are you and what did you do with my dad? She'd joked, but there was real joy in her voice. That evening, watching Zuri and Jessica giggle over some inside joke while attempting to teach me the latest TikTok dance craze, I'd realized something profound. I was finally present in my own life. Not just physically there, but mentally and emotionally engaged with the people and moments that actually mattered. My phone buzzed with a text notification, pulling me back to the present moment in my office. It was from David Kim at Nexus Financial, asking if I had time for a call about a potential expansion into the Asian markets. 6 months ago, a request like that would have sent me into overdrive, scrambling to prepare presentations and research reports. Now, I just smiled and typed back, absolutely. How's Thursday at 2 p.m.? That's when I saw the news alert pop up on my laptop screen. Former Argon CEO resurfaces at small startup after public exit. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the article. It was a brief piece in one of the industry trade publications, mentioning that Cassandra had accepted a consulting role with a fintech startup called Bridge Solutions. The photo showed her standing beside their CEO, a young entrepreneur who looked like he was maybe 25, and probably thought having a former Fortune 500 executive on his team would solve all his scaling problems. I stared at the article for a moment, waiting for some kind of emotional reaction. Satisfaction? Vindication? Pity? But all I felt was a mild sense of completion, like closing a book you'd enjoyed but were ready to move on from. I closed the browser tab and opened a fresh document. At the top of the page, I wrote, "The best payback isn't revenge. It's peace. The best revenge isn't loud. It's freedom. And the best decision I ever made was walking away." Below that, I started outlining my thoughts for Velmont's 5-year strategic plan. We had opportunities emerging in 3 new markets, partnerships with companies that valued long-term relationships over quick profits, and a team of people who genuinely enjoyed working together toward common goals. This was what success actually looked like, not the corner office or the impressive title or the salary that made other people envious. It was the ability to focus on work that mattered, to build something sustainable with people you respected, and to go home at the end of the day knowing you'd spent your time on things that would still matter tomorrow. My desk phone rang, and Jonas's voice came through the speaker. "You free for lunch? I want to talk about the Chun Industries proposal." "Absolutely. Give me 10 minutes to finish this up." As I saved the document and reached for my jacket, I caught my reflection in the office window. The man looking back at me was someone I recognized but hadn't seen in years. Relaxed shoulders, genuine smile, eyes that looked forward instead of constantly checking the rearview mirror for threats. A year ago, I thought my career was over, my reputation ruined, my life essentially finished at 43. I'd been publicly humiliated by someone I'd trusted, stripped of everything I'd worked to build, and forced to start over from scratch. But starting over, it turned out, had been exactly what I needed. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being forced to walk away from something you thought you couldn't live without. Because only then do you discover what you actually can't live without, and more importantly, what kind of life you want to build when nobody else is dictating the terms. I walked out of my office and toward the elevator, ready for lunch with a colleague who'd become a real friend, ready for an afternoon of solving interesting problems with smart people, ready for an evening at home with my daughter who no longer had to wonder if her dad was really present or just going through the motions. The best payback, I'd learned, wasn't proving Cassandra wrong about my worth. It was proving myself right about what actually mattered.